and welcome to the Budget and Finance Committee meeting on November 16th. I'm going to call the meeting to order. We do have a quorum. The only member who is not present at this time is Gary Bosack, and he may be able to join us shortly. Everyone has received the minutes from October 19th. I have not heard any additions, corrections, whatever to it. Does anyone have anything now to? If not, I ask for consensus to approve them as they were written. Okay, thank you very much. We'll move right on into the October financials with our CFO, Pete Finelli. And Pete, you have a little bit different presentation today, don't you? You want to tell us about that?
Sure, thank you, Ann. Thank you, all the committee members. This was what I presented in the past, and FYI, they'll still be posted out onto the website under financial statements, but it's a little bit difficult for the audience members to read, and so I've moved to a summary, which I hope you'll find a little bit better presentation. There are certain sections divided up into revenues, expenses, and which identify the operating cash inflow, and then there are capital related entries, and then the overall total revenues versus expenses. Thank you. Sorry. Very good. Thank you all. The first slide is for revenues for the current month. You can see that against budget, golf fees and bowling continue to post solid revenues against projections. We're very pleased to see this, as it was not certain golf's resurgence would be sustaining, nor would bowling necessarily regain its popularity since COVID last year. To date, they have greatly exceeded expectations. So overall revenues are up $141,000 versus budget, $169,000 versus prior year. Expenses variances generally were favorable, except for landscape maintenance. Reminder to everybody that due to drought and wildfires mostly in Oregon, seed cost prices were up considerably. In July, the governing board approved an additional expenditure of $275,000 that now has been utilized during our overseeding. Overall expenses, therefore, were over budget by $158,000 and $330,000 higher than prior year. So therefore, the current month operating margin was about $17,000 below budget and $161,000 below prior year. Moving to year to date, many of the categories have the same explanation as the current month. Overall revenues year to date are up $368,000 versus budget and $493,000 versus prior year. And expenses year to date are favorable to budget by $196,000, negative to prior year by $495,000, again with most of that due to the seed increase. So year to date, the overall operating margin is $564,000 ahead of budget, essentially neutral to prior year. Any questions on the operating margins by the committee?
Pete, what is driving the reduction in membership fees?
Against budget?
Yes.
Yeah. So there are a lot more in that category than people think. They think it's dues, but there are tenant cards, guest fees, late fees. It's actually one of the items that's a good thing, and I'll be talking about when Deb presents her reds, is that we've been much more active on keeping people current. And one of the byproducts of that is that people are not getting hit with late fees as frequently, and so that's the primary difference.
Okay. And I might remind everyone that the landscape and maintenance is because we took a big hit on our grass seed this year, but that was a good thing. We were able to lock in a price, even though it was considerably higher than we expected. We were able to lock that in, and we should have beautiful courses all through the winter. Right, Todd?
They very much so.
I have a question too,
Sure.
just for my knowledge or information. On the new development that's there behind Fry's, they're going to be part of Sun City West, and they will pay a membership fee, is that correct?
Yeah.
And when do those begin to trickle in?
Actually, wasn't something I was necessarily going to highlight, but it's perfect timing, Kathy. Up in the revenues year to date and under ancillary, the 69,000 favorable. Primarily, that's been beneficial because of golf, due to golf cart rentals and sales, golf range balls. But we did get the initial fee from Cavonian, about 23,000 was posted in October, and it fell under ancillary, whereas other income is located at. As
But-
far as your question for the dues and the APFs, they've been trickling in. We understood it at the last month, and I haven't gotten the most recent update, but anywhere between 15 and 25 homes are already under contract, and we're starting to see those.
And what's the total number of homes there?
It's my understanding that to be 50, 52 is the lots, number of lots. Yeah, Anita.
I have a question regarding the cell phone lease tower revenue. What category is that being reported in, please?
That is also under ancillary. It's considered a category under the golf maintenance because of where they're located.
How's that being reported for you, BIP?
What's the acronym you're using?
It's unrelated business income.
Yeah, we did check on that. I'll have to give you the response from Clifton Larson, but we're fine. So moving to the capital-related portion of the income statement for the current month, the number of APF transactions, it continues to be very strong. For realized and unrealized gains on the reserves, we don't budget for any valuation change. So there was a slight positive posted in October due to a strengthening bond market. Overall, the capital-related variance for the current month is a favorable 86,000 versus budget and 210,000 ahead of prior year. Year to date, as mentioned earlier, the APFs have been strong all year. For unrealized gain or loss on the reserves, the comparison against prior year was considerably lower, but this occurred because during the first 4 months of last year, the stock market was in the upward trend of the V-shaped recovery and was posting some sizable gains. So overall, capital-related variances are 138K favorable against the budget and 723 negative against prior year. So overall, total revenues over or under expenses current month versus budget and prior year are 69,000 and 49,000 respectively. And year to date, a favorable variance of 702,000 exists through 4 months against budget, and 725K below prior year, again, mostly due to the changes in the market valuation of the reserve funds and the increase in seed costs. Any questions on the capital-related portion? Thank you. Then we'll move to the next item on the agenda, our capital and reserves update. Again, the governing board approved a capital spend of $5.7 million, and to date we've issued about $3.7 million of purchase orders, $3.4 million or so being placed against the current year. Approximately 494,000 of the current year capital items have been completed and paid for, and upon those items, a favorable variance of about 44,000 exists at this time. And here's just a, oh, I'm sorry, that one, focus on that, sorry. Here's a brief list of some items which we have not necessarily issued purchase orders, but pretty slim list compared to the 150 or so we started with. A brief look at the allowances. The budget allotment is 395,000. This time we've issued about 46,000. So there's remaining balance of 349,000 at this time. Similar to the income statement, this slide showing the relative strength of the reserve fund valuation is difficult against the FFB is very difficult to see. So I've completed a slide to summarize it. Excuse me. The association began the fiscal year in July of 21 with a position of about 58% funded of FFB. Projected inflows of about 6.3 million are budgeted. You saw a few minutes ago that the operating cash flow currently is favorable year to date by about 564,000. Investment earnings are projected to be right at the budget. And the APF strength currently is about 303,000 ahead of budget. On the projected outflows of 5.7 million, you saw earlier there's about 44,000 of savings to date on the closed purchase orders and about 349,000 of unspent allowances. So at this time, we're projecting to have a funding percent of about 55% without imputing any of the positive effect of those items identified above, because we never do that until end of year, because a lot can happen between now and that time period. So any questions on the capital purchases or the reserve funds strength?
Yes, and I'm prepared to hold this question if it would be better discussed when Mr. Patty speaks. But I noticed in the next fiscal year, the irrigation project has increased from previous reports by $500,000, which maybe 12%. It's rather significant. Yeah. And it has an effect, not a debilitating effect, but an effect on the ratios in future years. That's my pre-mumble. The question is that the result of scope change or maybe more knowledge about the scope, or is it related to inflation expectations and maybe some feedback from the vendors that would maybe give us some insights going forward with capital planning as well regarding the inflationary environment? That's
thank you, John. Yeah, a little bit of all the above. The biggest mover was, in fact, we are starting to see some evidence from comparables around the nation on what a deturfing and what a irrigation replacement per acre cost. So that and inflationary pressures, especially due to labor shortages, and the price of oil has a pretty sizable impact upon a lot of the pipes. The second item is that at this juncture, and I did not change this, John, but we do have the grand view at a full deturfing down to the 90. In essence, there's I think 164 acres on that property. And I know that Todd will be introducing that whole status, so I'll let him speak a little bit more to what he's heard recently about what number of deturfs acres are likely to come about. But inflation was the biggest thing. I definitely added quite a bit based on what we were seeing.
Thank you.
So then the last one for me is just a real brief update on the fully funded balance. We have some new people on the committee here, and I thought we'd use this opportunity to explain an acronym which I mention a lot, and perhaps this little brief tutorial will help. First of all, reserve studies are reviewed annually by this gentleman, DJ Blaming. He is with Association Reserves. They are one of the premier reserve studies companies in the nation. He presented the entire presentation in January of 2020. It's online if anybody would like to see a little bit more on either side of what I carved out from this. But Katie, if you'll go to the first slide. There are three key components of our reserve study, or a reserve study. For Sun City West, we have over 1,200 line items, and this one is just giving an example. These is not our data. So the useful life, the remaining useful life until the projected replacement, and then the current cost estimate. And then if you'll go to the next one, just widget A, just an example of a $10,000 item, and it had a 10-year estimated life, then every year you would expect the reserve funds to have a $1,000 per year infusion into it, such that at the end of 10 years, you'd be fully funded to be able to replace it. This is a very generic example for simplicity, but we do infuse inflation into that, so it does equate for that on our actual software. And the last one's kind of the summary that hopefully will make sense to everybody. The first two I'll just use. So the pool furniture of 4,600 is essentially at its expected replacement date. And so at that juncture, the 4,600 entire cost would expect it to be fully funded. Second one is right at the halfway point of a $10,000 item, so 5,000, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So the fully funded balance is an accumulation of all these 8 items on this example. For us, it's 1,200 line items, equating to about $50 million at this juncture. And then we take this, our entire detail is sent to DJ. Yeah. Sorry, yeah. I see you're right on it. Can you click that, Katie?
That's the last one.
Yeah, thank you. So then DJ runs it through his software. He makes some considerations. For those that look at our income statement or our balance sheet, you'll see that our reserve is 28.7. It's right off the income statement. He has the software that equates all of our data and puts it out into his fully funded reserve. And it's a perfect opportunity to maybe communicate to everybody that the reserve study is not a static number. As John just alluded to, it's moving all the time on lifing, on costs that we find more data, especially in this relatively high inflationary period lately. And then so that graph right in the middle, the colored high, medium, low, you can see that at this juncture, he equates us to about a 56% of fully funded is where our reserve funds are. So that's considered in a very acceptable, even getting relatively close to the green, where it would be what is considered gold standard. This again, what does that mean? Risk essentially means that if you started to expend your funds at too rapid a rate, you run the risk of having to do a special assessment. So these funds are critical to make sure that we're always able to meet the needs of the repair and replacement. And then for rec centers of Sun City West, our policies also state that that $29 million has to be the source of new capital spend as well. So it's important to have this be healthy, and I think we're in a pretty good position at this time. So that's all I
Any
had.
questions?
Yes,
on
I have a
this?
question. And taking a look at the projections we have here, what I'm seeing is the FFB is going to be declining from this year from 55% to 48%. I mean, I know it's a projection.
Yeah, well, every year happens what on that one slide that showed the $10,000 example. So one more year passes, and at the end of the year, the essentially 90 million of, I didn't really explain that, but our component costs are about 90 million, and then the FFB is about 50 million. So one more year passes, and so July 30th, we have to infuse a whole nother year of taking those 90 million, whatever their denominator is, and that's, every one of them has a different denominator. But in summary, it moves it up by close to 5 million a year.
Pete, some of my past experience with capital improvements and repair, maintenance, et cetera, is to run those numbers out in a 10-year view at least annually, because you don't really know when the tsunami might be coming at you. and you'll have the ability in those first 5 years to make some adjustments by moving things forward or back. So I would recommend that, I would recommend that maybe the Budget and Finance Committee on an annual basis take a look at the 10-year run to be sure that we're not facing something unexpected that we haven't
Sure.
accounted for. So
I'll be glad
I
to
would
make the
suggest
slide.
that.
Yeah. Actually, on my base model, I have it open till
Right.
30 years. I'm constantly looking
Yeah,
at
even
that,
though I know
so.
everything moves around, but
Yeah.
it's really
Sure.
being prepared for maybe a high risk.
For my benefit, maybe to clarify a little test here, you can correct my statement here of my understanding of this. As I think of it, I think that as a community, if we had to replace everything right now, it'd be about a $90 million price tag. But with depreciation accounted for and the useful life remaining and such, we're at half of that, 50 million. Of that 50 million, we have about half of that. So therefore, said differently, in reserve, we have about 1/4, we have funds to cover about 1/4 the value of our assets if we had to replace them all tomorrow. Now, of course, that's crazy, and I think we've been through this a lot over the last couple of years. We're in a very, very comfortable mid-spot of a range. I mean, I don't know how we could be in a sweeter spot. We've anticipated these large irrigation projects with long overdue replacement coming up. So yeah, a slight dip for a few years has been expected. And I'm just asking for confirmation that my understanding is accurate, not only for me, but for those in the audience, those listening in, watching, and so forth. Could you comment on that, please?
Yes, you're correct. The upcoming budget year is going to be defined by Carl. It's certainly just a very early snapshot of the capital spend. But you alluded to there are years when some pretty pricey irrigation projects are projected. And sometimes ones that people don't think about a lot are some really high-priced asphalts and stuff like that, parking lots. When those occur, then those years there will be the dip, but then you know counterbalance that with, and so Kathy, I think you'll actually be a perfect opportunity for us to elaborate on that. You'll see some years, I think in 25 and 26 are pretty low spend or projected out the R&R.
And I just want to follow the money here just for a second. The APF fees go into the reserve, correct?
Mm-hmm.
And do the membership fees, when they come in, go directly into the reserve as well?
No, by policy, that is considered a portion of the operating income, and then
Okay.
the excess flows through.
Which
at the end
leads
of the
me
year.
to my question that I'm thinking about. When you look at, and I know this is the example here, and I think if you go back one slide maybe.
That's on the other one. Thank you.
Yeah. Are these just examples?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Because my question is this. It is easy to group things together to reach that $5,000 threshold that really should be in the operational side and not pulled from the capital reserve. And usually examples are such as painting, technology, where you're buying instead of getting it actually out of the operating. So I'm going to start probably asking questions like that as I see those.
Sure.
Because there are things that I don't believe should be in a capital reserve budget or paid for by the capital reserve, but by the membership dues.
Okay.
Yeah, just a heads up as I see that stuff.
Sure.
Pete, is our threshold for an item to be capital is 5,000 per item?
Yes.
That's what I thought, yeah.
Per item.
Per item, is that what you said?
Yes.
Yes. We do have, on occasion, we've checked with our auditors, and while they're not necessarily experts on reserve funds or reserve, they have allowed us that if a group of umbrellas, for example, next year, I think R.H. Johnson you'll see it on there, the canopies out at R.H. Johnson Pool. Each of them are roughly 3,500, I believe. And so when they're doing all 6, if they're all done and that amalgamation of them exceeds the 5,000 and it has the 5-year life, then they can be made into capitalizable. So
Why would we do that, though?
it's actually it's something we typically don't do, but you have the right to do that, and it's a decision that comes up on pretty rare occasions, but typically we use the equipment budget for those. So,
I would think since each one of them's
so
under.
to your point, and you'll see
Wow.
it in 2 minutes, so if that's the point, we can certainly make.
Just to add a little grist to the mill, Kathy, there is I can't remember the number of the financial policy, but it is defined in there, the 5-year and $5,000 threshold for capitalizing items. So it's spelled out pretty quickly, and I think what we're talking about is this sort of gray area where management has the ability to make a judgment call on it. My view is it sort of tends to be small potatoes in the big picture.
It is. And before, even if it was within that, we always usually check with, in this instance, it was Karen Woods before. Terry West has joined us in our accountant standpoint, and before we ever do that, we always reference our generally accepted principles for what is the industry standard for those umbrellas, for example, or HVACs every once in a while if you're doing like 3 of them in there. But actually inflation, quite bluntly, is starting to push many of those ones that are on the threshold are almost now hitting the minimum threshold with more frequency than I'd like. But I'll be glad to, it's always a question, and you know, he's right, there is some gray.
I have a question for you, Pete. And looking at the projections of the capital expenditures and the revenues over the time period is projected, and of course, they're projections. When I total them up, we're looking at a differential between the expenditures and the revenue of about $2,800,000.
What are you referencing? I'm sorry, just to
I'm
make
taking
sure.
a look at the capital expenditures. Maybe I got this wrong. Where we're taking.
Oh, I see, off the, yeah, you could,
And so I guess my question is, when I also take a look at it,
it's on the capital.
it's like 9,000,000, almost 500,000 of that is with the irrigation, about 26% of it. So I guess my question is that I'm looking at this saying, are we going to be running this very tight? Because I think inflation is really going to hit the components that go into any type of irrigation, plumbing, et cetera. And I guess the second question I have is, what do we gain from putting in the irrigation system? Is this going to reduce the water usage, or is it just replacing old, obsolete systems?
When Todd comes up, I'll let him
Okay.
redefine that. But
Pete, I do have another question, and it kind of goes to large capital items like that. The draw on the reserve, I know you pull on it only when you need it. Is that correct?
once a year, actually. So,
Okay, so why would you not move that irrigation project so that the funding would be over a 2-year period? Because it's going to take that long to get it in, which would smooth out the expenditures and not have that big of a risk, or not as much as of a risk.
well, the RCSCW policies makes that a kind of a moot point. So we don't have the standard, and I know a lot of you are in the financial realm, and I was in the healthcare realm for 35 years. And in most of my years, capital spend meant that at the end of the fiscal year, you were always very adamant about getting all of your items, so to speak, on the dock, installed, get them so that they were in service. And then you'd pay for them or accrue for the expense if you'd invoice if you already got it, but if, let's just say it was June 30th, had to be on the dock. Otherwise, it would start a whole new capital year and you had to fund everything brand new. Our policies are not that rigid. Once the governing board approves it, it establishes a liability known as encumbrance. And then all the POs that you see posted against that, and something that I put out on the website every month is the tracker. So we get to June 30th, and if in your scenario we were 1/3 of the way done, or you decided to split it, all it would do, so to speak, would be just put onto the encumbrance of, let's say, that 5.8 million, and half of it had already been paid for. We would just establish a liability for the 2.8 remaining to be spent in the next fiscal year, but we don't have to get it approved by the governing board but once.
But you're actually not moving the funds until you
Correct.
need
Oh,
it,
that's a little bit
That's the
different.
real issue,
It's a
yeah.
different piece of the question, but I could go
Right.
into great detail, but 5-second version is you pay everything out of your operating account, everything. We don't ever pay anything out of the reserve funds. And so you're paying for payroll, you're paying for supplies, operational expenses. You're also paying for the equipment and the irrigation systems. And at the end of the year, a equation is done where it says, how much did you have on your income statement? How much excess or decline did you have on your spend versus your inflows? That right there, you know, currently projected to be $1 million favorable this year. That would be on the good side of the ledger of what we don't need to pull from reserve funds. And so that just allows for the flow in or out one time a year, so we're not constantly moving funds like that.
No. The policies that we have, the flexibility that's baked into those policies also aid us with what I'm going to call seasonality. And I don't want to steal Todd's thunder here, but one of the things that we have to manage, and is managed quite well, is to try to time these capital jobs against the calendar when the golf demand is much lower, and we can not take away the use of the assets by the community. If we were to do this job maybe along some other lines with some other priorities, we would perhaps curtail golfing opportunities in peak season. So the flexibility that's in those financial policies work to our advantage quite well relative to the seasonality of some of the use of facilities.
I completely agree.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you, Pete.
Yeah.
Carl, it looks like you're up next with the proposed CIP for 22-23. Just a second.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me.
Oh,
Am I,
just a moment.
okay.
I keep forgetting to do this, but I do need consensus on approval of the October 2021 financials. Does anyone have any disagreement, or are we in consensus to accept them as they were presented?
Yes?
Yes. Thank you very much. Thank you, George, keeping me on track.
Well, again, good morning, everyone. Just to give you an idea of why I'm here today, last year we worked diligently on making sure that we had a clear understanding of the project planning process. This is part of our policies. Our project planning process had an addendum which didn't very accurately display our policies. So to get clarity, thanks to Donna Maloney's efforts in bringing this up last year, her and I worked very hard in getting a flow chart together to explain our policies. And in developing this, we did not change any policy. We are following policies. And this flow chart just simply kind of puts policy in its timeline and gives you an idea of where you are today. So as you see in the violet circle there, you are here. Over the last 2 months, you've had the appropriate committees, chartered clubs, properties, and now budget and finance have had the opportunity to hear any presentations from new capital requests. We only had 2 this year. You've also now have the opportunity to see what the next step in the budget planning process is, and that is the initial proposal to the general manager, which is due on December 1st. So today I'm here to give you a quick and brief presentation of what we are giving the general manager as our capital improvements list. And as you can see in that violet again, October and November, and then we move into the December and January months following this meeting, and you will start reviewing items over $50,000. The governing board will be more heavily involved in the overall budget in January when the operational budget gets added to this component. So moving on, I'd like to start the capital improvement proposed list to the general manager. My first section here are new projects. One exception is the Rip and Sew cabinet reface CR13 request. This is technically considered a repair and replacement item, but it did come up new because of the out-of-sequence timing that the club requested it with the CR13. You'll see that Clay Club monitor station is on here, that you heard the presentation from Clay Club, $30,000 with a $20,000 contribution from the club. We have new R.H. Johnson Environmental Services Maintenance Yard, property fence and gates proposed. This is a project that would enclose the environmental services acreage with a 8-foot tall chain link fence and create a couple gate opportunities where the roads go across and secure that area. We are currently experiencing people going into our areas that are not secure and stealing, damaging, and taking up residents. So you'll see if this gets approved that at the entrance by Fry's and the environmental services maintenance area, we'll also put a gate. And then, like I said, the outlying boundaries from Hillcrest up to the social hall, a fence. Moving on to the next project would be at the same location. In this current budget that's approved, I have an environmental services office that is going to be built. Due to that construction, it moves the storage connexes, which are the steel shipping containers that we use for storage of items for the rec centers. We're going to move those over to the dirt pile. We're going to spread them out and create a little gated fenced area on the front and back and a small steel roof over the top. So that would allow us to secure a couple of vehicles and golf carts, if approved. Moving on to Beardsley. At the Arts and Crafts Building, we have a storage yard made of masonry block, closed on 3 sides. One side's open to a walkway. And this area is also being vandalized, and materials of ours are being stolen on a regular basis. We propose to raise that masonry block wall with some decorative iron fencing and create a secure compound with a new gate and a walkway fence along the sidewalks, right against the building going towards the Clay Club. And then finally, on the new capital requests, this is a community project, if you will. At the streets, North Lasso Drive and West Limewood, we have 2 streets that are currently dead-end streets, and they have a cyclone fence that are constantly being broken into, and undesirables moving into the community, and using the canalways as an access point for other things. It has been asked by previous governing board directors and staff to have those 2 dead-end streets blocked and masonried off for security, and that is at a architectural plans and documents and construction cost of $75,000 approximately.
Carl?
Yes.
As we do each section, if you don't mind, I'm going to see
Perfect.
if anybody has any questions. But I do have one question. You've mentioned 2 items now that are subject to current vandalism. Is there not anything that can be done stopgap to secure those areas and keep us from having that vandalism? I understand from, I don't know if it's from you or someone else, they think it's homeless or. coming into the community, but it may be
It's a little
others.
difficult, but we've done measures using cameras, put some cameras in for the, temporary, maybe even permanent basis, but it doesn't allow anybody to stop just rolling into, for example, the environmental services yard. It's not just about vandalism. People are rolling in and taking their trash and taking it to the back and dumping, and we have a huge trash problem in the back. Wash machines, couches, all kinds of stuff. So, it's more of a securing the area. It's ours to be protected. We've only had the circumstance of a vehicle being taken once, and that was actually from a different location, so that vehicle will no longer be stored where it was taken before. So we're really just trying to create that environment so that we can make sure everything is kept inside. Now at Beardsley, it's a different story. The control measures, it's just wide open. There's a masonry wall. It appears that it's enclosed, but if you look at the building, it's a walkway that goes all the way to Clay Club, and there is no fence line there. So we would establish a 6 to 8 foot tall iron fence to secure the items that are just accessible to anybody walking in.
Hey, and from the back, if I can chime in, it's Katie.
Yes.
We're working to bring the sheriff or his District 3 commanders to Sun City West on November 30th. So he would have a big community meeting in the social hall to discuss some of these issues and offer solutions and hear from the community. So if you want to mark down November 30th, we'll have him out here. He's aware of some of these growing issues, and we've asked him to come out and speak to the community.
Thank you, Katie. Does anyone else on the committee have any questions on this first set of items?
I have a question about something that's not here on this list. Last year, I think there was some talk about surveillance on the parking lots. We were going through a rash of golf cart thefts, and there was some discussion about, I guess, checking the lighting, but I think the primary focus was on surveillance cameras. Is that moved forward at all, or is that just kind of been dropped? Thank you.
I don't think the term dropped would be appropriate for it. I don't think it got approved last year. So I think it's a subject that's always being reviewed. I do know that one of the topics for it being not accepted is that it gives cameras can give a false sense of hope as well, if they're not full-time recordings and the cost associated. So I think it's an ongoing discussion.
Okay, thank you. It's a commentary on the times that we have to devote resources in that to some security measures that maybe 20 years ago didn't exist. So thank you.
Any other questions? Okay. Oh, excuse me.
Hi, Margie Cantrell, 122309. Just a question to you, Carl, regarding the arts and crafts storage yard. Is any of that taller fencing going to go around the Clay Club's patio? Because we've had theft there. We've had to move our tool cabinet inside. We've lost a grinder. One day I showed up and our propane tank was over by the fence to be taken out the next day, I guess. But we have chained them to the walls and done some things there, but we do continue to have some issues there.
I am not aware of those issues that you're sharing. And I would certainly hope that you have mentioned that to David Bennett or Tim Peterson. They did not mention that during the discussion for this enclosure of that area, and they're the ones that asked for this enclosure. So again, this is a proposed list to the general manager. We have time to broaden that scope and figure out a new cost if it's necessary.
Okay, well, let me go back to Tim and I'll talk to him. We've talked about it off and on. We've talked about cameras and things, but I've never filed any kind of a form that says let's do something, but let me check on it, okay?
Okay, I appreciate that.
Thank you very much.
Okay, Carl. Oh, yes, Anita.
Thank you, Ann. In regards to this budget, what kind of percentage have you put into place for inflation? And more importantly, if these projects are getting done closer to the end of next fiscal fiscal year, are we gonna have to go in and reallocate funds or add to these budget numbers or what?
So when I take the approach of putting this capital list together, I don't just do it from a perspective of today's cost. And Pete will contest to this, we put this budget together with a timeline. So we are understanding of what the original idea and time frame that we would like to accomplish this, and we do put in a factor through those conversations for inflation. It's difficult, but I will say that you don't see a lot of facts and findings requests for additional funds from myself.
Now, in regards to the factor, is it a flat percentage across the board, or is it by a line item?
I'll tell you, it's more of a common sense. So based on what's happening in the industry today, if we perceive that that's going to continue on over the next 6 to 12 months, then maybe that factor needs to be increased. But we are definitely experiencing things like 7 to 15% increase across the board. I do not like being up here and anybody saying padding the budget, you know. So it's easy to overinflate these costs. We have very difficult budgets to pass. So we are, I would say, very disciplined on how much, you know, inflation factor we put in here. I think common sense also says that if we get into a season where a project goes over and the facts can be presented to you, that we make good decisions together as a governing board and staff in trying to get additional funds. So I'm confident that these prices are good. I haven't been tripped up yet this season. It's not over yet, though. There's a lot of big things coming. I am experiencing more material shortages than I am cost issues, so.
Thank you.
Thank you,
welcome.
Carl. Okay, next section.
Okay, on the next session, this is a very large section, but it is right from our reserve study modeling tool. And this is for the R&R that we that you can see in that tool each year. And I will tell you that on this particular R&R list, we have 2 asphalt projects scheduled for next year, and you will see that both of them are of considerable size. Deer Valley's parking lot mill and replacement, and then the R.H. Johnson Section 2. Section 2 is from the parking lot north of ARC, between Men's Club and ARC, all the way through Pickleball, the library parking lot, and the Common Drive right in front of the Sports Pavilion. These projects are virtually identical to what you've experienced over the last year and a half between Palm Ridge's full tear-outs and Kuntz's recently completed tear-out. I would do this in a multi-phased approach for R.H. Johnson so that we can meet all the community's needs in scheduling, and that's that for the asphalt. Moving on, we have a couple.
Carl, I do have a question. What triggers the idea, what triggers that we are going to do a resurfacing? Is it something like it's the end of life, or is it we take a look at the and say, hey, it's good, it's bad? I mean,
Time and evaluation. So every asset of ours gets a useful life. We are approximately 10 years past that useful life on most of our lots that are 40 plus years old. And then the evaluation professionally from myself, other staff members, and then the professionals of the industry coming out and taking a look and giving us a recommendation on what they think. You know, can I get another seal and stripe in on a 3-year basis and prolong the life of that lot as opposed to tearing it out?
Carl, to have these, particularly the R.H. Johnson one, which will have a lot of disruption, is there, I know you haven't done anything with bids or anything, but have you considered a 24/7 work schedule for that?
It was brought up last year, and we discussed it with our vendor. There aren't no vendors that offer that.
You just have one vendor?
No, we have multiple vendors.
okay.
It's not an industry standard for our size and our design of parking lot. That kind of service would be provided at a much higher cost for like road building. So I don't think that it's necessary.
So 2 shifts would be out too?
One shift, they generally start at 5:30 to 6 o'clock in the morning per county guidelines. That's the other factor,
Yeah, I know
is that work has to be
time frame,
in
yeah.
by 5 or 6 o'clock in the evening, depending on what seasonal time of the year.
Okay.
So,
Thank you.
you're welcome. Okay, moving on, we have 2 flooring R&R replacement projects. Palm Ridge's Aquatic Center simply is the carpet inside the central lobby of the aquatics building, the stairs, elevator, and upper walking track area that has carpet. And then we have a pretty large logistic flooring project, and that is the R.H. Johnson admin building. So all of the admin offices. If this project is approved, we would roll this together with doing the lighting upgrades that are still yet to be done at R.H. Johnson and interior painting. Moving on, we have what we call just projects in general. The aquatics outdoor pool shade canopy is due for replacement. And the R.H. Johnson mini golf lighting and wiring replacement. This would be converting our current metal halide bulbs to the LED efficient lighting package. And this has been on the budget for review for approximately 3 years now. Yes.
Is that a 3-year payback or a 5-year?
On the efficiency of the lighting, I don't have that direct information, and I don't think it's quite that quick of a payback due to the size cost.
Okay.
So we have equipment, R.H. Johnson equipment for drapes and motors and a floor cleaner. And then we have approximately 2 HVAC units for next year. The next 16 line items are roof restorations, 13 of which are the golf course pro shops and their matching maintenance building on the central sections of the course, all due for restoration. And then we have 2 rec center buildings, men's club 3. The Kuntz Maintenance Building flat roof right outside of tennis, a very small building. The men's club flat roof, and then the larger roof, the R.H. Johnson Arts and Crafts flat roof areas. And that completes.
I'm sorry, I have another question on roofs.
Yeah, go ahead.
It's kind of in my bailiwick here. Will you bid that all together, or will you bid it in 3 kind of projects, or how will you try to get some competition out of the
I literally
costs?
bid each one individually.
And do you ever bid it as a package to see if that
I
reduces it?
evaluate all those bids when they come in and see if it is a benefit to do any packaging. I don't really expect,
Why wouldn't you do it as one big package just to get a sense of that?
I can do that. The outcome, I believe, is the same. The roofs are almost all identical, so there's not much of a difference between them.
No, but for a vendor, there would be a big difference in getting all the roofs than getting just 2.
This is true.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Any further questions on R&R? Okay. Our next section is golf. Also an R&R area. Todd has a small presentation. I'll run through the list real quick, and he can answer any questions he may have. In the golf maintenance area, we have the irrigation system replacement at Grandview. You have golf maintenance equipment, golf maintenance vehicles, a shoreline repair, Grandview number 13. Golf Ops has golf carts, approximately 20 of them. Golf Ops will also be proposed to replace all their golf ball dispensers, 7 of them. And then we have landscaping items, green mowers, and a light item for utility vehicles. Any questions? Very good. We'll move on to the final section, which is our general. These are our allowances. You'll see that we've put in for changing demographics. We do that on a yearly basis. This would be for any projects that would be considered out of sequence, that come up due to new discussions that aren't necessarily planned for. ADA compliance upgrades is our next line item. After that, we have energy conservation room lighting. This is a very large number in comparison to what we've put in this category before, but $370,000 completes the R.H. Johnson Rec Center as a whole for all of its interior LED lighting conversion that we have completed at the 3 other rec centers. I think Pete can share with you that in his review of our utility bills that we have seen a considerable change. This is our last rec center to complete. We have already done the parking lot lighting approximately 4.5 years ago. And this would complete our energy conservation program. Moving on, we have safety and structural, allowance for well pump replacement, an allowance for information technology, and allowance for equipment. And this would finalize my presentation of what we propose to give to the general manager on December 1st.
Yes, Anita.
In regards to the $75,000 changing demographics, does that take into consideration the committee that Jim Sloan is putting together? And if so, how much have we paid towards that? And is that coming out of the $75,000?
I'm not aware of what you're referencing, sorry.
No, I think you're referencing the master planning.
Yeah.
Yeah, the master planning is actually an operational expense. So if anything emerged from that before, well, we have an allowance in the current year for if something emerged in the wake of those discussions, but this oftentimes would be the perfect place for that, yes.
Carl made the comment that it's, we every year do this changing demographic study. What historically have we, the amounts that we've used of that amount? Is $75,000 realistic? Is $75,000 over, $75,000 under? What is it?
I'll speak to that, Carl. So last year, there was just about 20,000 expended. Last year, you hear about this a lot from Katie at Charter Clubs, is the Charter Clubs software program to allow for attendance to be monitored. It's going to be extremely useful for space utilization and the master planning. This current year, on the presentation I had earlier, there's been 20,000 expended. You're standing where one of those came up. A discussion was made to change the stage here for a little bit, maybe Sue could speak to this, but better presentations and I don't know, Carl, you can speak to that, what they're doing.
I can take it from there. It was requested that for the repurposing of this meeting space in a better layout and in a larger desk format, that the stage be expanded here. This will be filled in with concrete. The stage will be the cube that you see right here on this line and all the way back, scooted down, and this door will be eliminated, and you have a much larger usable stage for all these committee meetings. Since they are here, they're under recording. This is the prescribed location for all of our governing board needs.
I have one question. Perhaps Pete, in reference to something you said, Pete may be the one. You're talking about this energy conservation, 370,000, and you said we're seeing savings in our bills. What kind of payback? I know Kathy asked earlier, but I'm not sure we got an answer of how many year payback we're getting on these.
With your blessing, I'd love to have a presentation on that at their next B&M.
Okay, thank you.
But there has been clearly some decline.
Okay, thank you.
Could I ask a question back to the changing demographics? To me, what I've heard is that sounds a bit of a misnomer, that it might be more of a fund that we use for some minor things, but it's really not addressing changing demographics. It's really more Band-Aids that we put on to take care of a particular issue. So maybe what Jim Sloan is doing, and I think he is working on a bigger committee to look at changing demographics, might be a little bit more appropriate. I mean, that would be changing demographics in a more systemic, planned way, as opposed to this, which is really, I think, to me, it sounds like Band-Aids. So necessary Band-Aids, but Band-Aids.
Dick, I tend to agree with you. I wonder if it's just the titling of it. Changing demographics might be something of the past. I would call this a contingency or some kind of flexible fund to account for that, and then have an accounting of how that was spent you know, to follow up with Anita to know exactly how it was spent and where are we in that. Maybe it's just a term that causes more confusion than clarity.
I'll speak real briefly to this. Some of you may not be familiar with this, but we had the same quizzical question that when there was actually just one of these allowances for some reason. I know Donna's in the room, but when she was reviewing the RR&Ps, it was referencing the policy that pertained to chartered clubs needing to get approval for a changing demographic, and that was actually inscribed as a policy. We could not understand why that, needed such definition when, so that was eliminated as a complete FYI. I'd also like to speak that I guess allowance contingencies are, in my mind, a very similar term. I've chosen, I believe, to be very transparent about these requests. I think you all know this, but if you're not, we are beholden to the general manager's authority extends to $49,999, and anything that was ever going to be pursued over that has to come to the governing board. So I give you this update, and I'd be glad to communicate any of them at future meetings that are added during the month.
Kathy, I just want to add a quick question here. Bill Schwinn. Sue and I have meetings every Monday, and we talk about all kinds of things, this particularly one being one of them. You guys have hit the nail squarely on the head when it comes to semantics here. It is confusing. Allowance, contingency, that type of thing. But this particular one, changing demographics, is really facility enhancements, facility improvements along the way. Things that pop up that just kind of, obviously there are good things to do. With a little bit of allocation here, with an approved budget, we have the ability to do so. So I think as this thing is presented and rolled on, you'll see a name change here.
Any other questions? Gary?
Carl, you've got a specific purpose for the R.H. Johnson work, and I would understand that a well pump needs to be in here in case one goes out. We got to find one quickly to get it fixed. Changing demographics, Katie, I defer to you, but my recollection, and it echoes back to Cindy Knowlton days, and it began with her wanting to do some surveys about what the mixture of population in the community was going to look like, and that's where that money came from. And equipment, just as a general, I hesitate to use the term slush fund, but it just seems like these are kind of what ifs, except for that one specific with the LEDs. Would that be inaccurate? I'm not trying to.
I would prefer you not use the word slush fund, but if a key component floor cleaner goes down,
you got to fix it.
you have.
So these are what ifs.
The governing board has appropriated funds for the general manager.
Well, you use the right word. It's contingencies.
Yeah, that's right. Why discolor it when it's a positive?
So they're all contingencies for the most part.
So just to be clear too, because I agree with you, because you have a malign item like this, if you have let's say something that goes down that's not on this list, then you can't expend those funds. Is that correct? I'm really looking more favorable towards you than not.
The general manager has the ability to make 50,000 and less purchases discretionarily before he has to go to the governing board. Where those funds come, I know that he discusses with the CFO, so that's not really, I don't get in the weeds there, but.
Yeah, but because it's because it's coming out of the capital reserve, and maybe this is a peak question. Yeah, I just want to make sure we're not boxing ourselves in.
This is oftentimes confusing. I believe these allowances were done primarily so that the governing board wouldn't have to be convened ASAP in the middle of the night to have to do an emergency authorization. Give the general manager his authority. A perfect example some of you have been bringing up was equipment. It doesn't mean that an item that fell out of sequence, I think Carl uses that terminology very well. We can't always predict that the reserve study has a refrigerator over at Pebblebrook, which actually happened this year. A freezer is on the reserve study to be done, I believe, 2 or 3 years from now. It went out. We have to have that. It was replaced. We expended out of this allowance account. It's capitalized just, through our normal depreciation policies. But then the reserve study picks it up, and then I move it to a new future date. So things stay in sequence. We were just talking earlier about energy conservation. That very well could, and by the way, it was only $20,000 in the current year, just for, if something crops up that was not necessarily anticipated. Just generally speaking, last year, safety and structural went quite a bit over. We had some sizable issues emerge over at Palm Ridge under the foundation. Last year, out of the 420,000 it was approved, I think we had 282,000. So it's not, that we just put some arbitrary amount. We generally speaking try to look historically. One that's emerged recently is IT. The reserve study used to have all the servers and other kind of higher dollar items. We scrapped that. It's just, you have no idea how long those are going to be. So the IT will pick up that as needed, and it's generally speaking been more than adequate to cover it. Well pump replacement would be the perfect example of, we have all of those items at each course built into the reserve study. If it breaks, so to speak, out of sequence, then, in fact, usually Todd can speak to this, but typically he doesn't go into the budget saying, this is the year it's going to break. If it's functioning, it's going to continue to be worked unless we start to spend tens of thousands of dollars repairing the same one over and over. So this allows, when it finally breaks, that we can expend those resources, remove it from the reserve study with a new, or give it a new date, and on we go. So yeah, I could show you all this, kind of behind the scenes stuff, if anybody's interested.
That's good. I'm not questioning
Sure, no, that's fine.
validity of this budgeted amount. I'm not questioning that at all. My question is, when you get so detailed like this, it really is a contingency, because the general manager then has the ability to spend under 50,000, as I get it, within this whole category, correct?
I
Right.
agree.
So it seems to me you would have, again, perhaps contingency related to, and then you have an example list, and then that's reported back in some way. Because you're taking it from the capital reserve, you have identified specific areas. So I bet that what we approve and what's actually spent doesn't line up appropriately. I'm really trying to give more flexibility than this, because with our approval, if you've got a well pump that's $105,000, I would say, no, you put 95 down there. You see where I'm going with that? Yeah.
That actually happened, by the way. Within 2 months after I got here, Desert Trails, I think, had a 95,000, sure enough, front and center for facts and findings.
So I'm trying to be more flexible and yet transparent at the same time.
I think I hear what you're saying, Kathy, and correct me if I'm misinterpreting this, but we've got 740,000 of contingency. Do we need to be so detailed in where that contingency is? And my other question then would be, might we look back on former years and see what was our total in this and what was our total spend? And perhaps we only need to fund 90% of it, or 80%, or what. I'm just throwing out ideas here. Is that what? Okay, I thought that's.
I'll be glad to provide that, yeah.
And if I may just comment on that, approving a budget or a contingency budget of $740,000 would require me to answer 29,000 phone calls as your general manager. This is an attempt to kind of identify by category what these contingency items are typically used for, because, authorizing me or whoever your general manager is to give them a blank $740,000 checkbook with $49,999 available for me to allocate funds causes some concern amongst some people, because we hear it all the time. And so having this broken down into a little bit of a categorization, I think helps. But I think there's plenty of flexibility there, but you certainly can make any kind of recommendations you care to the governing board. But in a situation like this, at least from the experience that I've had here, goes a long way in helping. I.e., the slush fund, the contingencies, the allowances, those kinds of comments we get grilled on all the time.
Thank you for that clarification, Bill. I did not take that into consideration. Okay. Are you done, Carl?
I'm done.
Well, thank you.
Not yet.
Not yet.
Madam
Treasurer.
Okay.
Not yet. Can I have, a question? First of all, my compliments on not only this presentation, but the entire capital planning process over the last 3 years has improved immeasurably in terms of visibility and clarity of how these very important funds are spent. And I know there's been a lot of hard work put into these documents. My evidence to support that statement is the discussion we've just heard. I don't believe that discussion could have taken place 3 years ago because I don't think there was enough visibility and understanding of these projects. So my hat's off. Now, Carla, you might want to hold your comment a moment because the other foot is about to fall. I have a couple suggestions when we get into the springtime that might further enhance that, and especially the clarity part of this. When the individual projects come up in the springtime, I think it would be very nice if you could, where practical, include and highlight any potential shutdowns of facilities or restrictions that would go to the facilities, and maybe if there was an alternative or a workaround, what that would cost. Similar to the discussions we ended up having about the Coons parking lot job, and just have it there as a matter of course. And then the other thing is, and this goes to Pete's suggestion or offer to recap the energy conservation program, where we have operational savings as part of the job. I think it would be good if that could be appended to those notices and say, gee, we're going to spend $300,000, and I don't care whether the metric is a payback in years or dollars, but some form of efficiency coming back to the community would be an enhancement that I think would help all of us understand how our monies are being spent. And there's no question the facilities are maintained and in good shape. I'm very proud of the community. It's wonderful, and I think the more we can do to allow all the owner members in the community to graphically see that, the more they would benefit. So that's my suggestion. Now, we have at it.
John, I'm just going to tag on one thing to that. We're soon going to be discussing policy FY02, but under FY02, under guidelines, it says each separate request in the capital budgeting portion of the annual financial plan may include, but is not limited to, the following. One of those is details of cost savings for improved efficiency and operation and any other specific benefit for the expenditures. So it does say may include, but you may start hearing more. Please, we may not go so far as to say must include, but that may be something that will be requested. So, from comments I'm hearing today. Yes, Carl.
I'd be happy to include in the next session of the project planning process timelines, also for projected timelines with the proposed ideas. So that wouldn't be a problem. And number two, charter clubs. I just want to put this in there. Charter clubs have seen the same presentation and properties, and you are the last to give a recommendation today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Madam Treasurer, just the contingency that we were talking about, I think that we're getting lost in the weeds on that. We are running a $25 million a year budget here, and the amount of contingency is about 3%. I don't want us to be, as we say in the old retail world, jumping over dollars and chasing nickels. So just to that point, I think that a lot of times we get lost in the weeds on a small amount when we don't look at the overall picture. Thank you.
Thank you. Todd?
Yes.
You are up.
Great, thank you. Good morning. Today I'm going to give an update on our irrigation project over at Grandview. Phase 1, the $865,000, which is funded in the current budget, includes irrigation design, the turf conversion design, irrigation mainline road crossing install, our pump station that will include in that, the new one, required county permits. And then one that we're working on right now is the allowance to submit documents on behalf of rec centers to the Arizona Protection Fund grant, which is the Arizona Office of Tourism, which could potentially give us $500,000 that would go towards turf reduction and irrigation. So that's a big one. So hopefully we'll have those finished up here in a couple weeks, and then we'll submit those and we'll get that going. All right, just a update on the phase 1. The field survey has been completed so far. That was done a couple weeks ago. It took about 10 days to complete that. Irrigation consultant Marvin Mills has completed his survey of the golf course and has prepared irrigation base map, combining the aerial data and also the ground survey. The hydraulic analysis has been completed. That's the piping size throughout the golf course, the main lines, all the laterals, and that. Request for information on the existing utilities around the roads over at Grandview has been submitted, and that takes about 6 to 8 weeks. And then we met with Watertronics last week at the pump station to go over the pump station needs and take measurements and figure out what kind of a design we're going to have for the new system. And it used to be that you could get a new pump station in about nine weeks. Right now, they're at about 23 weeks out to get that. So, and then I put together a timeline on the project. This probably could change, but you can see in the year of 2022, May and June, that's when we actually do the road crossing main lines, the installation on that, and also the pump station in those 2 months. And then we go out for bidding. Then we submit our bids for phase 2 of the irrigation and turf removal project. And then we would do that in April of 2023. And then that would take us, if we close in April, we're looking at finishing up in August at some point, and then opening the golf course after the fall overseeding in mid-October. And as far as turf reduction goes, I'd like to mention that we've worked with ADWR, and I think we have this pretty much nailed down as far as how much turf that we're going to have to remove on the 4 golf courses. And we're looking at about 35 acres, maybe upwards of 40 acres over at Grandview. And if you take the perimeter of the golf course and you remove the turf around the entire golf course by about 12 or 15 feet, you can almost pick up 30 acres just by that alone. That does not include the road crossings and some T areas that we would do over there. Over at Pebblebrook, we're looking at about 16 to 18 acres of turf coming out. Echo Mesa, about 12. And Stardust, right now, we're looking at about 9 acres of turf that we would remove. And this would all satisfy the ADWR, the 5th management plan that rolls out in 2025.
Okay.
So if you have any questions.
Questions? Lots.
I have.
Todd, refresh my memory. It seems to me 3 or 4 years ago when you started the irrigation replacement presentation to the golf committee, Grandview was $1.9 million and Pebblebrook was $2.1 million, and now we're $5.9 million for Grandview. Is it possible prices have gone up to that degree?
Yes, absolutely. And I don't know, Pete, if you want to jump in on this, on the price increases over the year and just recently with the inflation and the cost of parts, whether it's piping or heads, pump stations and all that, and also the labor to do the work.
Wow.
Yes.
Are these bids going out as ITBs or are they going out as RFPs? I guess I'm bringing back my government background. ITB is an invitation to bid where you take the lowest cost, or is it an RFP where you're actually going out and evaluating each contract or each proposal separately and based upon merits and scoring.
Pete, do you want to jump in on that one for me?
Yeah, you're referencing also our policy to put 3 competitive bids behind actually everything over within the capital budget. So we always have that spreadsheet behind it. First of all, maybe Todd can speak to where we're at already, because I don't know the number of contractors that even do the actual irrigation project. But what we have in front of us was the design work that came in the very early part of this current fiscal year that we're in. And he extended invitation, as you said, for them to present their team, what they would do. And I don't know the names, but from those 3 invitations came Gary Brawley and Bill and I and Carl and Todd met with those folks, and Gary Brawley was selected out of the 3.
So basically, you're using an RFP process
Yeah.
where you're not necessarily taking the lowest bid. You're looking at
Correct.
each
And that is,
contract.
Yes.
That answers my question.
yeah.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Yeah, I have a couple questions. I think, I don't see in here any opportunity for community feedback. And I only say that because when you're impacting as many homes as you're going to be impacting with the reduction of the turf, and I might say I'm very much in favor of this proposal, but I think we need to have some graphics of each golf course and where the line is now and where it's going, and go out to the community for feedback on this. I think this is critically important to do. Along with that, though, I think we need to have water savings per year, electrical savings per year, and anything else that might be a savings that goes with that. Because as we know, there is a water shortage, and that is the message we're trying to send.
Yep, absolutely. And that'll all be coming out. We'll have mapping that people can look at, especially the people that live around Grandview Golf Course. And then we also will present a water savings when we have all this mapped out. This is very early right now. So, but that will all come out and have an energy savings, water savings, and then also a design map where people can see where the grass is going to be coming out on that golf course.
I would suggest you put it in on your timeline then, so it's real visible, maybe a red box.
Yeah,
for
and that
community.
timeline, I update that
Yeah.
as I go along. So yes, that
I
will
know,
fall
I
into
can't read
place.
what's in your head unless I see it.
But that will be coming out.
Thank you.
Yes.
I do have a question on that. I mean, we're gonna be mandated to cut our water usage. I mean, that's pretty much apparent to everyone. So that'll be an evaluative standard. So if you turn around and say something like, the state has said we have to cut back 10%. Have we factored that in to say, hey, we can meet this standard in our design?
Yeah, and that's what we're looking at right now. We know that where we need to be in 2025 to satisfy ADWR, and that's where that turf conversion or the turf removal comes into play on those 4 golf courses.
Do you happen to know what that percentage is? Is it 3%, 5, 10?
I think it's closer to 10%.
Okay, so we have no real choice in this. I mean, I know it's upset we need community feedback, but I think they also need to know that we're not given an option here. This is something we have to
Right,
do.
yeah, absolutely.
There's no voting here, just.
Yeah, and with ADWR, when they don't tell you that you have to take turf out, they just say, this is how much water you're gonna have in 2025, and you figure it out yourself. And so that's where we come into turf removal. That's how it's all gonna work out, because we still wanna have golf courses, we wanna have playable golf courses, but we wanna stay in compliance with ADWR in 2025. But they don't come in and say, you gotta take this turf out over here, or you gotta remove it over here. They're not doing that. They're just gonna say, we're reducing your annual allotment by this much, and then you need to figure out how you're gonna make it work. And of course, turf reduction is the number one way to do that.
I guess a follow-up question to that. I mean, this is gonna be the first round.
Yes.
I don't see this ending anytime soon.
Right.
I think Lake Mead, Lake Powell, I've read articles on those, and they're diminishing quickly. So do we have to be in front of the curve? I mean, this year we have to cut 10%, the following year maybe another 5 or 6. I mean, how does this go?
Yeah, and talking to ADWR, they update their management plans every 10 years. And in talking to them, they have told me that in 2025, that would be the end of the management plans. They're not going to make any further cuts as far as golf courses go. Now, they could make some reductions in some of the areas, whether it's agriculture or residential. I'm not sure how they're going to do that. And so I don't know if we should hold them to their word or not, but I would expect there's going to be further reductions. I don't know if it's going to happen on the golf course, if it's going to happen in, like I said, in agriculture or in housing developments.
Water in Arizona is precious. And one of the things that I basically studied, and I think I've told George and others this, a few years ago, when applying for this job, I spent 3 days down at Arizona Department of Water Resources, not knowing who Todd Patty was, but trying to get as educated as I could on water. I've managed golf courses in the state of Arizona in several communities, both north and south, and water is your critical link. There are people that use potable water, or communities that use potable water to irrigate their golf courses, and their water bill is about $500,000 a year. Sun City West, due to Mike Whiting and some other legal, and obviously the governing board's assistance, due to a lot of legal work done 10 to 15 years ago, established a rather great reserve in groundwater. So that when you talk about water in Arizona, there's all kinds of water: potable water, groundwater, and surface water. Lake Mead and the runoff and the output of there, that's surface water. We're talking groundwater here, so there are different sets of rules. So if you, as a developer per se, if you wanted to build a new subdivision in the state of Arizona and have a golf course put in, you are limited to 90 acres of turf. That's what the government says is a playable amount of grass. There are neighbors surrounding us that have golf courses that have close to 220 acres on an 18-hole golf course. They got to remove that down to 90. That's a lot of turf going away. We're not in that boat, thankfully. We've got a couple of wall-to-wall golf courses here, but we do have a lot of desert courses in our inventory, which goes to help us tremendously because it's not all grass. So that really plays into it. But really, the study that we're kind of focusing on, as Todd mentioned, is 2025, and those are the rules that apply there. It's a 90-acre system. So we have to enhance our irrigation systems, right, to bring into, as best we can, very modern heads, new pipe, new sizing and whatnot, and that will really cut down, I think, the amount of water that we're wasting, and then putting water where we need it to play the game of golf and enjoy it. So there's a lot going into this. Todd is completely on top of it. I couldn't be more thankful to have him as our golf course superintendent when accepting this position, knowing you have 7 golf courses here you got to maintain. That's staggering in the world of drought, in the world of Arizona, and it's tough. Very good. But what we pay for groundwater, I can't really say this because this is recorded, it's almost criminal. I mean, you got great rates going on here and doing what we do, and it's in perpetuity. So contractually, I think we're in a very good state, but we just have to comply now with the kind of the 90-acre rule. And that's, again, coming down the pipe, no pun intended, in 2025. So if you have any questions, just stop by, ask. I got an entire bookshelf in my office dedicated to Arizona Department of Water Resources.
Thank you.
I'd like to make an editorial comment. I don't think it's necessarily tied to this. This is an opportunity for us right now to get ahead of the curve and to, I don't know if marketing is the right word, but to inform our residents. We're on top of this. We know about it. We're going to do it. We're proactively working on it because this is the kind of thing that if left unattended to will draw criticism. Why are we doing this? Why are we doing that? We know why, but we want our residents to know why. We talk about transparency. Let's do something about it. And this is a perfect opportunity for us to capitalize on it.
Thank you, Dick. Good comments. Kathy?
I do have one other question, at least on this topic. We recently signed a water agreement with Briarwood. Where is their stance in getting down to the 90 acres?
Well, I can't speak for Briarwood. I don't know what they're going to do as far as going to stay in compliance. You know, they got a wall-to-wall turf golf course over there. I think they have probably 160 acres of irrigated turf over there. I'm not sure what they're going to do to get into compliance for 2025. If they have plans of removing some turf, or, you know, other ways you can do that. You can cut back on your overseeding. Again, they're going to reduce your allotment that you have every year, and it's up to you to decide how you're going to stay within that allotment. So if it's turf reduction, or if it's not overseeding or reduced overseeding, those are all things that come into play.
So it's a bit of a math equation too. We were contracted with Briarwood to give them, I believe, 330 acre-feet of water that we had available to us that we were not throwing, and they were paying for that. But their irrigation system, they had changed the size of their delivery pipe in their well system, went from like an 18, 16 down to a 12. So for them to utilize all the water that they needed, they couldn't get that much, they couldn't draw that much. So they're paying for water that they really weren't using. So they came to us and asked if we could negotiate that back down to a pay what we use program. So they gave us back close to 100 acre-feet of water because they couldn't use it anyway. But they are in the same boat as far as turf removal, and I can't attest to what they're doing over there as far as, you know, what they're and how they're going about.
I think it would be good for us to know what they're doing. If we're selling them water, I think we should have a knowledge of what their plan is as well, because as I understand it, I was pretty adamant about having a clause in that contract that gives us an escape out of that if something would come up where we might need more water or they're maybe not complying. So, and that never got in there. So I suggest that we become transparent with them in having conversations on, now what are you doing? What is your plan like? I feel pretty strongly about this. If we're selling somebody else water, our water, we need to see what their plan is. I'm not saying they don't have a plan,
Right.
and I'm not saying they're not going down there, but let's be transparent about it, because guess what? We have homes on that golf course.
Right?
Yeah.
Certainly, thank
So
you.
we need to do that.
All right.
Any other comments for Todd?
Yeah, I have one. First of all, this is a really good start, and we're starting pretty early in the process. I would anticipate that these charts and timelines and data included in it will become more robust as more information becomes available from your part, as well as some of the feedback and input you hear of what people desire. So I think we're off to a great start. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Yeah, you know, as we get more information and we really nail down how much grass we're going to be removing on the golf courses and the design and all that, this is really going to pick up steam, and there will be more presentations and mapping and all that will be available to the public so that they can have some input on that.
And the last comment I'll make on this is that I think I totally endorse what Dick Rhodes said there about a marketing opportunity, if you will, both positive and negative influences and knowledge. So I think maybe it's we can put an aggressive move on press releases and things of that nature through the media, and that this can be an opportunity as well as a problem.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, thank you.
Madam Treasurer, I'd like to comment about this golf course irrigation and the projects that go with it. First off, hats off to the staff and to prior groups who have probably brought this to head and bringing this under. Grandview's irrigation system is 40 years old. Okay, it is becoming more and more a problem to upkeep it than to replace it. The other thing is that strategically, Todd and the staff and everyone else has looked at going down the road. How many years was it? This was a 15-year outlook project for our golf courses that we took it in. Instead of kicking the can down the road, they've put it into the reserve study, and you can see by the numbers, the reserve study is affected, but not affected severely, whereas we would have to do it overnight. With the Arizona water this is we're in 2022-23. When this project would be done, we're going to be in compliance for something that's 3 years down the road. And John, to your point, I agree with you 100%. We are looking very, very, very far down the road and being ahead of the curve, well ahead of the curve. And for the residents and owner members of Sun City West, they should be very thankful that we have a staff that does this and looks forward on it. Thank you.
Any other comments? Well, I have to say, I've got a great committee. You all come up with some good stuff here. We are finished now with this portion of the CIP, but I do need to get consensus from all of you that we would move this forward for the governing board to consider. Now, realizing that we're a long way off from approving a budget. Not every.
That's my question, Madam Treasurer. I thought this was information only for CIP.
Well, this is information only, but Sue, correct me, were we not supposed to come up with moving it forward, or is it just that we've seen it? Yes, that.
Go ahead with the recommendation, but it is early, and it's only to go into the, have the general manager
Yeah.
put it into the budget.
That's what I thought. So what we are doing is allowing it to be put into the budget right now. Like I said, we're very early in the budget process. This will go to the general manager the 1st of December, and you're going to be seeing this a lot more.
Thank you.
So all it is are we in consensus that this can move forward in the budget process at this point in time? And trust me, you'll see it a lot more. Yes, Anita?
I would suggest, I like Kathy's suggestion about getting this information out to the membership, especially with a bottom line of several $1 million. Get it out before the budget comes out, write an article for Rec Center News, get it into the e-blast, whatever, so people know that this is coming down the pipe and why we're doing it, and like George says, we are being proactive.
Absolutely. Good ideas there, and with what Dick had to say. And Carl, yes.
Just a friendly reminder that every committee that we have, this is published, just like you see it in board docs, our community sees it in board docs. So it is the starting portion of the PR, if you will. So all of this information that we talk about today is the same information you have in your packet that the community has. And then the next steps will grow as we contribute the information and questions that we've gotten today and add more details for budgetary reasons.
And thank you. And Carl, I cannot imagine having to give this presentation as many times as you have already given it and still have to give it. Okay, we are ready to move on into committee goals and talk about committee review. Because we still have quite an agenda, and this, I will remind my committee, is because we did not have 2 meetings last month, or this month, we're only having 1. I'm going to call for a 5-minute break so we can kind of stretch, get some water, whatever, then we'll come back and finish up. Thank you for that, and we will get on with our meeting. The next item on the agenda is committee goals, and with that, I put policy C03, section 1.2, which is the B and F. And I'm going to kind of do these two together. I don't know that we finalized these last time. This may be old business that is under new business. I can't remember now, but we didn't do anything with them. Thank you. Anyway, I just wanted us to go over. This is the charge for our committee. So it basically is what our goals are. We shall review all aspects of the financial policies and plans of the association, make recommendations to the governing board and the general manager. So that's what we are going to be getting today into policy review, something we do every year. We shall provide recommendations to the governing board regarding the general manager's proposed annual financial plan for the ensuing year, the 5-year financial forecast, capital equipment, and projects by December 1 each year, which we have just done, and the association's insurance requirements and policies. We are already starting to see information from our CFO, Pete Finelli, on the insurance requirements and policies, and we will be moving ahead with the proposed annual financial plan, better known as the budget. And prior to the first day of January each year, we shall recommend for governing board approval a reputable CPA accounting firm to conduct the annual financial audit. That has already been done, and we, by next year, we will be at the end of our 3-year contract with Clifton Larson. And it would be my suggestion to whoever is treasurer next year and is chairing the Budget and Finance Committee, that perhaps that might be a time for us to have a committee and do RFP to see if we want to continue with them. Just something that we probably should do just to do our due diligence. And finally, the company shall oversee and report the performance and balances of invested association funds reserve on a quarterly basis to the governing board, recommend policy changes regarding the investment of reserve funds as necessary. And this is something that we do through our CFO, Pete Finelli's reports to us when we look at the reserve funds. And as we look at our policies, that will include the investment of reserve funds. So I just wanted to open it up if anyone has any discussion on these goals. These are set in the policy statement of the board, but is there anything anyone thinks that we should do just for this year? Anita, yes.
The only comment that I would make is instead of using the word reputable, why don't we use duly licensed certified public accounting firm? Because if we decide to take out and do a one-off project with an accounting firm or whatever, you want to make sure they're properly licensed with the AICPA and the Arizona Certified Public Accountants. And so I know I'm into semantics, but I'm just thinking from a standpoint that it would look better language-wise to use duly licensed.
Any comments on that? Yes.
My question would be is, if you're a certified public accountant, wouldn't you have to be licensed? That's kind of like redundant, isn't it?
Yes, you do have to be licensed by the AICPA in Arizona State.
So then if you're,
and the problem that you have is you have sometimes where you have certified public accountants that have either been disbarred, per se, or they haven't kept up with their dues, and so consequently their license is inactive. So that's what, I'm just talking from my perspective, sorry.
there's no problem.
John.
I like Anita's wording just because it's a little tighter. There's less wiggle room in there. And I wanted to confirm you're talking about 1.2.3.
Yes.
Okay.
So we would propose changing that to prior to the first day of January each year, this committee shall recommend for governing board approval a duly licensed, D-U-L-L-Y-L-I-C. Do we need certified?
Yes.
Yes? Okay. a duly licensed certified public accounting firm to conduct the annual financial audit. Now, I'm going to ask our Madam President, since this is a policy, can we bring this forth as a redlined item to the governing board workshop? Is that how that goes? This is my first, okay.
Redlined suggestion.
And that's how this would be.
Mhm.
That, okay, I've not
Right.
had to do that before, so I want to make sure I'm
Mhm.
following the correct
That should work.
procedure here.
And I have one other change, or
Sure.
maybe it's implied, but the Budget and Finance Committee is recommending the accounting firm for the financial audit. Nowhere in here does it say that the Budget and Finance Committee reviews or the audit report. We do that, we see that, but nowhere in there is it telling us that. And we can redline this later, however you want, but it feels like it's absent. We can,
I'm trying
I
to.
can't
I'm re-
imagine you wouldn't have a Budget and Finance Committee not review the
Right,
audit
I
report,
was
but it's not in there.
I was reviewing this to see if it's implied somewhere.
Yeah, I didn't think it was. It's a nit, but if we're cleaning
not-
up, that's a good cleanup.
Seeing that, would you like to take this and redline that for us, please?
Sure.
For our next meeting,
Mhm.
including the duly licensed
Okay.
too. Okay, is everyone in agreement with that?
It could be interpreted to be inclusive in 121. If you wanted a broad definition or there. I don't have an objection to it, but.
Well, we say review, I was looking at that, Dick, all aspects of the financial policies and financial plans. But what you're saying is that we're not looking at the financial plan, we're looking at what has already occurred and approving that. Is that correct, Kathy?
I would tend to put it under 1.2.3 and just after that statement, say something like acceptance of the financial audit.
Madam Treasurer, it may be stated in one of the other policies that's not in front of us. So I think we should, before we make a change to this, I would review all the other ones to make sure it's not stated
I have
somewhere else.
reviewed all the others. I don't think it is, but it's
Well,
be
excuse
good
me?
to go back a second time to be sure that I haven't, missed
Yeah.
that. So,
Kathy, if you're going to
Yeah,
take this
I'll
on,
be
would
happy to
would
look
you do
back on
that
the
and review
financial-
those?
yeah. Mhm.
Yes. Thank you.
yep, no problem.
Do we have anything else we would want to add to this? Okay, thank you very much. So we will move forward with those goals then. Now, we were going to start on 3.07, which is review of policies FI01 and 02. And I lumped these together. Our first meeting of the year, which seems like it was a long time ago, and we did not have Richard and Dick on the committee then, I had asked for a review of policies FI01, 02, and 03. I have received, excuse me, a change for 03, and so far no one has suggested anything in FI01 or 02. Does anyone have anything at this point in time that they would change on FI01 or 02? If not, do we have consensus that they will show just that they were reviewed again on November 16th, 2021? Okay, we have consensus on that. Let's move on to policy FI03. And as you will see, we had a 3.1.1 was the same as the wording above it. And it just seemed redundant. Didn't need to be in there. So all we have done is redline that out and change the numbering on the items that come after that. Although it looks like I got aggressive with my, no, that's not the strikeout. The four, that's the line on the 4th. Almost looked like a strikeout. Anyway, that was the only change requested on that. Does anyone have anything else that they would want to change on FY03? If not, we will accept that as amended, or reviewed and amended both on November 16th, 2021. The next item is policy FI10, which is the procurement policy. And on this one, I had a red line suggestion. This concerns the procurement policies for the recreation centers of Sun City West and the parameters to be used for all purchases, leases, receipts, and accounting for goods, supplies, and contractual services. Under vendor relationships, it says there is a strict prohibition for any employee, committee member, or governing board director of the association who has or whose relative have a substantial interest in any sale, purchase, or service to the association from participating in any manner in such contract, sale, or purchase. What has been inserted there is federal, state, local government, association, or business. And now that I'm looking that, I'm thinking that phrase may need to be moved around in that sentence. Is that that's reading a little stilted to me. Anybody have any comments? Does that look okay? Is it just me?
Well, I'm trying to see, are we trying to prohibit or are we trying to be transparent with conflict of interest?
George, you were the one who suggested, why don't you enlighten us?
Cassie, I was, when I was doing this one, I just think that we put the idea of whether a committee member has an affiliation with somebody. Sometimes they don't have an affiliation with a family member, but they may be involved in a committee with a state senator or a local representative or a mayor or a town council, where they would be directly influencing about how and who we purchase from or what we're doing. And I was trying to put that in there as protected. How it's worded, that's fine. I am truly, anybody who's dealt with me knows, and I will go to the current president, they will tell you I write an outline for him. I'm very, so how it's worded is, but that's what the intent and thought was on this one, to protect the association and somebody on the governing board to having, they know that they're in the procurement, there's a policy issue, not only a conflict of interest. Thank you. How you word it is fine.
Do we have this worded correctly? Anita, what he had?
I do have some concerns. Y'all, my southern accent's coming out here for a bit. When I ran revenue, you or your businesses had no problems calling me up, asking questions or trying to resolve problems, okay? I still have relationships with inside the Internal Revenue Service, inside the Department of Revenue, as well as other nonprofit organizations. And yes, consequently, there are times when people may call me up asking me for recommendations of someone for tax work or someone for this kind of work and so on and so forth. Is this going to prohibit me or others in the organization, others in the community that may want to step up to the board or step up to the committee, precluding them from giving some insight and some context? Personally, I think this is being a little bit short-sighted. The way this is worded, I'm sure, George, you can probably get around and get the point across without being, I see it too constrictive. That's just from my personal opinion.
Anita, and thank you, because again, like I said, it's just a thought process that's out there. I looked at it this way. If we were saying that we were in charge of the widget company and we were buying it, would we want our governing board director to be recusing themselves from that? because their company is involved with it. And that's kind of the idea. But again, if you think it's too restrictive and all that, I have no problem in taking it back, looking at review. We can always come back to a policy. I just want to make sure that we're doing what's best to protect the association.
And I appreciate that, George. We do have the word committee member in here. So is this something that, because you've got employee committee member or governing board member, do we want to narrow that scope down to just governing board member rather than affect every person on every standing committee that we have within the organization?
Another comment might be, I'm not sure, do we have a conflict of interest policy? Do we have a conflict of interest policy?
Yes, we do. L2, if I remember correctly.
Which would be exactly what Anita just came forward with, saying, I have, connections, et cetera, and you're transparent about that. The key word here is substantial interest in the sale, but maybe it just needs some fine tuning. I hear where you're going, because I agree with you on that. So it's combination of conflict of interest or.
Could we use just
Yeah.
an odd example, just an odd thing? We have, if we were going to have any type of outside transportation coming to the community, would we want to have our employee or somebody who has an influence on that giving direction to us? That's the question that I'm asking. Just as an idea, we have, outside influences. We're in a unique situation in Sun City West, along with Sun City, and I'll give them, is that we are unincorporated in Maricopa County, where we don't have a mayor, we don't have a town council or anything like that. Would we be amiss in making sure that our people who represent the owner members here are not in an issue or a conflict of what's going on the outside of bringing in something that maybe we don't want, or that is just something that works very well downtown Phoenix? Just, and again, how it's worded, I have no problem with that. You can go on there and word it any way you want. But again, Anita, I agree, it may be too restrictive, but that's just the old restrictiveness.
Trying to figure out where to go with this one. I think probably what we need to do before we go forward any with this policy FI10 is all of us go back and review L02, which is conflict of interest, and then come back next month.
And two, L2 also is as a representation of governing board members, not employees. I don't know what the employee manual may have or may not have in there, but it would have to be a two-pronged approach on this one. This was the procurement side. It was waving the broad brush and not who you're representing, whether you're a governing board, employee, or purchaser, or whatever. It was the broad brush on the other side. Thank you.
Does that make sense to you all, that we should go back and look at L02 before we, okay, so let's bring this one back under old business next month, and we will go ahead and, after everyone has had a chance to look at L02.
Just a quick question for Bill. Do we have a conflict of interest policy for your employees?
In the employee handbook, I believe so.
And if we could get a copy of that, that would be helpful to read that in line with that as well. Thank you.
Okay, moving along, which in this case means moving backwards because I skipped poor FI04. Just completely ignored that, which is a reserve fund policy. And under that, we have reserves funding policy number 4.0. And 4.1.3, the capital-related fees and expenditures adjustment shall include asset preservation fees as defined in policy FI17, net of capital expenditures, and it was suggested to redline, including club-funded capital and the change in the capital encumbrance amount. I put this in, and then it dawned on me, one of those middle-of-the-night things, we may still have club-funded. In fact, we have a proposal next year that will include club-funded from the Clay Club. So I think we would be premature to remove this. We do know that we also have some 501c3 clubs that may be able to raise money and do some club funding. The ability to do that has been taken away from the 501c7 or charter clubs, but I think we're premature to take this away. Now, I'd like to hear what the rest of the committee has to say about that. George, you were the one suggested this.
And I will agree with you, but when it came to including club-funded capital, the word funded in there is we, with our tax situation that went on, we took away the ability for our clubs to earn income.
We have done that.
And so trying to be consistent with the RRMPs, that is why I thought that should be struck out of there. But again, I hear what you're saying, that there are clubs out there that have a checkbook that can write it, but I would look at the idea of earning funds is much more different than club funded, and I wanted to make sure that we weren't in conflict with the RRMPs on that.
I'm going to ask Director Maloney if she has a comment on that. Will that, should we change this to club pledged?
I would suggest, instead of saying funded, contributed.
What would that?
Instead of saying funded, to say contributed.
Club contributed. Okay. Is that okay? So we agree we will change this club funded to, and we will leave in club and red line funded and put contributed. Is that correct?
Club contributions.
Club contributions. Okay, so we will remove, we will keep including club. We will redline funded capital, and we will put including club contributions. Is that, Bill, what, do you have a comment?
No, that's all good. I just wanted to remind you that at our last governing board workshop meeting, the board was commenting on the issue of escrow, or at least when clubs make a pledge or a contribution into the future, that money's paid up front, just to kind of get away from the obligation thing that we're going to be talking about here later in the scenario. And I was working with our finance team to kind of figure out a spot where to include that in the policy, and this might be an area in which we would place that. I don't have the language yet, but I know Cliff and Pete were kind of working on that. But at least as far as clubs coming forward in the future, if they do want to see and they do have available revenues through membership fees and whatever they're doing, that if they did want to contribute something along the way to assist in the enhancements of their facilities, that they could contribute, but the governing board was thinking they should get that money up front.
Thank you, Bill, and I was going to get into that too. I appreciate you bringing that up. We do have a line item when we look on the budget that shows club funding. That probably needs to be changed to club contribution, because as I understand it, I asked the question, I'm going to use the Clay Club as an example. They're requesting $30,000 for their monitor station. They can contribute $20,000, which they currently have in their bank account. So I asked, why is this not a $10,000 item? The answer I got was because we put it in to our capital as the full amount of what it is. It's $30,000. The association owns that. So we will show a line on the budget for their $20,000 coming in. Is that not correct, Pete? So we need to keep club contribution. I would suggest changing that to contribution instead of funding. But the other place that what Bill mentioned, and I brought this up at the workshop last week, and I believe Donna Maloney has been working on this with the RR&Ps, and we would need to make our language match. But something to the effect that the general manager will ensure that club contributions, if that's what we call them, are in escrow prior to the start of a project. Donna, am I putting words in your mouth, or is that kind of what you had in mind? Yes. Okay. So when those RRPs get dealt with, I think we will also want to put language in FY04 to match that. And this will, of course, then be up to the general manager. It's not a policy that we are going to, we're going to be responsible for getting the funds, but the general manager will.
And
Yes.
currently, what we are suggesting for the RRMPs is the general manager will determine club financial obligations according to the individual request and secure a commitment from the club when appropriate. That's currently the language that we are suggesting.
Okay.
For you to be consistent, so that we both can be consistent.
Do you want it more specific than that in terms of the word escrow?
I don't know that we need it more specific. What does my committee think?
I have a suggestion that maybe we table this until the dust sort of settles on the other work so that we only have to change it one time.
I think that's a good point. Okay, so we will table even the change that we're making in 4.1.3. We did have another change going forward under 4.1.4. Funds shall be transferred as soon as cash flow amount is determined as per the final audited and approved year-end statement, comma, but no later than the end of December following approval of the transfer of the governing board. And that is for the reserve funds. And what that just does is spells out what we currently are doing now, but it puts it into a policy. Does that make sense, Anita?
Just one concern. Since we are going to basically hold it out to potentially the end of December to transfer the money, what happens in the instance where we have a very large unexpected expense that is going to take that capital reserve from X down to X minus Y? How does that going to relate, since you're putting in there as per the final audit and approved year-end statement?
Well, again, good question, but we do not ever draw from the reserve funds during the operational year. That's why we have the operating account. It holds a minimum balance. Generally speaking, we don't have the balance sheet up here, but at this time it's 9 or 10 million. And it would be used in that emergency situation first, and then we drew it up at the end of the year. Nothing is prohibiting a direct transfer, but it just would cause, a minor amount of.
I understand what you're saying, Pete, but what I'm concerned about is from a standpoint of what is considered to be, and I'm at the loss of the accounting terminology word that I'm looking for. What is considered large or what is considered medium? If we start transferring stuff, say we're going to transfer 10 million over, and at the end of the day, we've got a $7 million expense because of X, Y, or Z that you're going to take out of operating.
Well, when it reaches that type of, then we, of course, nothing prohibits the reserve funds. It's just impractical because it requires wire transfers. There's nothing, innately difficult about that, but.
As I guess my concern is also from a standpoint that if we're telling the membership that we're transferring X, Y, or Z over, and again, we have this unexpected whatever expense or whatever the case may be, how are we going to go out and tell the membership that we had what we were planning on transferring X, but it's now X minus Y?
Well, we would never necessarily do the membership directly, but everything you're referencing would require a fact and finding. And in that juncture within the recommendation, it would be, if it was that draconian, it would be the recommendation is for the governing board to approve the direct transfer from the reserve fund to the operating account to pay for this unexpected. Never say it can't happen, but it would be highly, irregular.
Any other comments on this? I'm hearing that we possibly should just table our policy FY04 until we have more information. Is that correct? Is everyone in agreement with that? Okay, we will bring that back under old business when we have more to report. John, did you have a comment you wanted to make? Okay. We will now move on to 3.1, which is the REDS program update. I'll introduce Deb Long, who is our REDS expert.
Hello, everybody. Our REDS program started in February of 2020. Okay. So what is REDS? REDS stands for Real Estate Data Services. What this does is I get a daily download from Maricopa County for any deeds that have changed on any properties within Sun City West. If there has been a change at that time, we look to see if there's any APFs or owner member dues, transfer fees that are possibly owed due to that deed change. When did it start? Again, it started February 20th of 2020. The cost is based upon the number of properties, and it runs about $900 per month for this program. What are the benefits of REDS? Owner members benefit because the agreement with the rec centers, they're required to communicate any change in title. However, many people forget or intentionally disregard this requirement. They just think that they own their home and they don't need to let the rec centers know. But owner member dues and things are charged because of the way that you hold title to a property. This kind of helps them out also because it could avoid possible retroactive fees. To date, REDS has currently collected about $70,000 in fees since February of 2020. 700,000, yes. 542 of these were collected in the fiscal year 2021, the remaining so far in 21-22. 148 would project an annual amount of 474,000. So the program is retaining efficiency. Approximately 63% of the 700,000 or 441 has been collected in asset preservation fees, while the remaining 37% from owner member annual dues and transfer fees. Using this denominator of 3,500, about 126 of the APFs posted in the past 20 months has contributed to the program. And there is a graph of the APF collections. Any questions?
I would point out, I put this graph on. Deb did a great job of helping me prepare this on her behalf. I hope it does answer your questions. But you can see in 2021, there were 1,445 collected. If you look at the 3 years prior to that, generally speaking, 1,200 is about the run rate. So well over half of the 245 generally perceived excess that came into the FY21 emerged from this REDS program. So it's been very beneficial. So,
John.
I have a question, and thank you for this. Are the funds that we've picked up a function of a gap, a revenue leak that we plugged with this visibility and we've caught up now? Or is this likely to go on in the future at this kind of a rate? You know, was there a backlog there? Of missed opportunity that once you fill it, it doesn't repeat? Or is this the gift that keeps giving?
Both. Kind of both. Again, owner member dues are charged by how you hold title to the property. Prior to February of 2020, the rec centers expected that people, if they did a deed change, would bring that into the member service department and pay dues accordingly. 9 out of 10 people that live in Sun City West have no idea about that. So the program brings that forward and says, okay, these are the 150 people this month that had new deeds changed. And I look at all 150 of those and say, does it affect what they should be paying for dues? Or are there new people on the property? Did they do a for sale by owner? Didn't go through a title company? The biggest change was the inheritance. Prior to February of 2020, anybody that inherited a home was not considered a new owner. They never paid new owner fees. They paid a transfer fee and owner dues, but not an asset preservation fee. So that is a big change, and that it really started catching up in this last year because people were grandfathered in prior to February of 2020.
That would imply to me that it's ongoing savings that
Most,
we can
yes.
expect.
Mhm.
And that's what I was hoping to hear.
Right,
Thank you.
and we're also still getting things from people that changed the way that they held title back in 17, 18. So that can go backwards and be caught up. Yes.
I think this is a wonderful opportunity for us to get into the 21st century with documentation. How current is Maricopa County's Recorder's Office on getting this stuff done?
So generally, by downloads are about 10 days old. So if I was to look it up on the Recorder's or the Assessor's Office without a document number, I probably wouldn't be able to find it for 10 days. So they are about a 10-day lag time. So it's not real long.
It took 9 months to get my parents' house title changed. I just got it last month.
Okay, yeah, if you're trying to get something recorded with them, they are pretty picky when it comes to deeds.
And I have a question on the mechanics. What do we do, or does this help us if someone was delinquent in their dues? And, and we get notified by Maricopa County that they're gone now. Do we then pursue that? Is this a program that would help us pursue delinquent fees that would be to the community?
Well, generally the delinquent owner dues, first of all, the membership department takes care of them. So after 30 days, if they're delinquent, they get out the late fee statement. At times when it starts to get sent back to us, then the question is, why are we getting these statements back? And a lot of times they'll give them to me and say, I think there might have been a deed change on this. So yes, it does kind of start some conversations on that also.
And I think we certainly can go over this other sometime, but after the late fee, I believe it's another 60 days, then a lien can be established on the property. So in many ways, John, two things are happening. The inheritance, I think, is bringing it forward, but these title changes affects the change. And I don't always view it just as the gift it gives. I believe that this brings immediacy to people who are aware. I can't tell you how many times people make a title change for benefactor death type purposes, death planning. And then if they didn't record that, all of a sudden we're going 3 years down the line and without knowing about it, and by our policy, you can go back. I mean, nobody likes that. And so I believe every year that passes, we're going to get further and further into having the right people on the right title. It's a win-win, in my opinion, for everybody. But going to a delinquency, the lien is on the property if it's been that delinquent, and then it would go with the closing final sale.
Any other questions about the REDS program? Well, we'll move on to red line of policy FY17, and we'll get this up here. I think John Hobold is very, very familiar with FY17. Aren't you one of them who, John practically made a career of FY17 last year, but it was very important for us to make several revisions in this as we started the REDS program. And Deb was instrumental in working with the committee members. Was it Lisa Vines who worked with you? So they had many, many hours of going over this, and as we have found out, and Deb keeps us apprised of this very well. Thank you, Deb, for all you do. But when she sees areas in this policy that are possibly subject to different interpretation or need to be changed, you bring them to us.
Correct.
And this is one that Deb has brought to us, feeling that it needs to be changed. So would you like to explain this to us?
Sure. So what we are proposing is the 3.1.1. If you see the bold part that states that changing more than 50% is when the asset preservation fee would need to be paid again. So this is more like when you've got a spouse that owns a property and maybe not even a spouse. Okay, so you've got somebody that owns a property and they meet a significant other and they add somebody to title. They're not changing the deed more than 50%, so they're not charged the asset preservation fee. So that was one of the changes that we made last time. What we're trying to do is change 3.4.4 to read the same as 3.1.1, so that so it should read, ownership of the former residential unit must hold a minimum of 50% ownership in the new owner-occupied residential unit. There we go. Okay,
We
so
are missing this in the packet. Pages
Okay.
2 and 3 did not get copied. So if you can look at the screen.
So previously, the way that this would be is if you own a property and you change the way you hold title by adding a person to title, you would not have to pay the asset preservation fee again if you're in the same residential unit. But 3.4.4 did not change at the same time, so if you bought a property and you changed the way you held title and added a spouse to title, you would have had to pay that APF fee. So we're 3.4.4, we're trying to change that to match the 3.1 so that you can still change the way you hold title, maximum of 50%.
Does that make sense to everyone? What we're trying to do is just clean up, because we have a policy that is currently saying two different things, and we want them to match. And I apologize, this did not get copied and put in your packets correctly, but does it make sense to everyone, what we're doing? Getting rid of a contradiction.
Madam Treasurer, has this been through attorney review?
Yes.
Thank
Yes,
you.
James Hazelwood made the changes.
Any questions on this? Do we have consensus to accept this and forward this to the governing board workshop?
Can I have a question?
Yes, Gary?
So would this be the example of what you're describing? Mom dies, son becomes the title holder, no change, son and husband become the title holders, there is an APF fee.
You going to Deb or me?
Whoever.
Okay. So what we found, I may be re-explaining what Deb said, but give you a real-time example. In the one that, in a currently held property where you're not doing a replacement, the governing board approved this 50% ownership change such that if somebody loses a significant other, they didn't even sell the property. They just had someone pass away or move, divorce, whatever. And then they find, as we've heard, their new love, as we get all the time, and they add them on to the title. That didn't make any sense, that we'd be imposing an APF fee. Everybody agreed with it, it sailed through. But when you actually move to a section, and this is why we're proposing this section is on replacement. So this is when the property is actually changing hands. And it came down to number 4 said, what we commonly reference is like for like. So if John Doe wanted to add the new person onto their property, and they did it at the inopportune time of when they actually made the change, instead of like adding them months before they moved the property or months after. But if they weren't like for like, and all they did was add somebody on, SNAP would go the APF requirement. So what we're essentially saying is, if all you're doing is adding one person, then that doesn't trigger that component of an APF refund request, so.
Does that make sense to you, Gary?
So this here is for a refund request, and those, if you could slide it up, Katie. Yeah. There are 4 requirements, real briefly, if you could slide it up just a little bit. 4 requirements when you sell your property in order to get a refund. And this is if you are staying within the walls. 1, you have to own your property for a year. That's number 1. So you can't buy and get a refund if you only own the current property 6 months and you move to a new one, sorry, The second one is you actually have to prove that you're moving from your existing property by proving that you have sold your existing property within 12 months. This is essentially addresses what we call investor properties. Third one is you're not essentially just running a rental through there. So if you've had any usage of a rental tenant card 3 months, we consider that you're not really using your home as a residence, you're using it as a rental property. And then the last one is where we got tripped up, is that it said that you have to prove that you're like for like on the old title and the new title. So if all you did, I hate to say it, but if all you did was add somebody, your new love of your life, and you put it on there, it seemed unfair that that wasn't like for like. Had you added them to the title 2 months before you made the change, you would have put them on, you got your dues would have been changed, and off you go. You could have bought your new property, been sold on, and added them 2 months later, you wouldn't have a problem. But when you do this like for like, it causes people to get caught in that trap, and we do not want to be, abusing that in that manner, in our opinion. So now we just say, if you're not changing it by more than one person on a one-person deed, or if you have 2 people on it, 2 people can be added. So just gives us the flexibility not have to impact people that didn't do anything for that purpose.
Does that make sense? Any other questions? Then do we have consensus to move this forward to the governing board for their workshop for approval to review? Okay, thank you. Next up is a CIP pledge relief update. And this goes back to an item that we had on our agenda last month, which was titled Loan Forgiveness. And Bill Schwind and I did this presentation last week at the board workshop. And I'm going to kind of start off, and then hopefully Bill can help me with this. But we have had several conversations with our attorneys and a CPA on our attorney staff. And one of the questions that we had come up at our last meeting was, if we are forgiving money to these clubs, is that income to those clubs? So we had quite a long session on a Zoom meeting with the attorney, and what they equated it to, the easiest way I can think of, is you enjoy watching PBS. So much so that you think, you know what, I'm just going to give them some money every year. In fact, I'm going to give them $1,000 a year for the next 10 years, and you make a pledge to PBS. But 4 or 5 years goes by, your financial situation's changed, you don't like their programming for whatever reason, you just say, nah, not going to pay it. PBS has no way to come back at you to get that. If they forgive, when they write it off, it is not income to you because you did not have a legal instrument that they could use to come after those funds. It was a pledge. Same as if you make a pledge to your church or your kid's school PTA, anything like that. So they suggested that we, instead of using the word loan, we use pledge relief, which is what it is, because basically club loans do not exist. We do not have anything in writing with these clubs. These were just agreements that were made. And Bill, you want to come up and talk some more about this?
Back to what Ann says, and you're absolutely 100% correct. We do not loan clubs money. That's never happened. So we were basically dealing with pledge agreements all along. One more, if you could. Thank you. And so in dealing with the legal and tax reps that we kind of have been consulting with, the main ticket as far as forgiveness goes comes down to the enforceability of what we have. We do have signed agreements with pickleball, tennis, and stained glass. Those are the three clubs that are still out there that we're dealing with pledges per se. But there's really no repercussion on these clubs if they were to stop paying, and then we have to deal with the statute of limitations. And the thing that I just want to focus on, and I'm going to get Cliff up here to kind of talk a little bit about the taxation side that we've all learned, but it really comes down to a fairness in my world when we're dealing with these particular clubs. What didn't get really broadcasted or announced was, for years, Stained Glass had wanted to expand their facility. And they had come to various meetings like this and governing board meetings and asking to have their club, based on the size and the growth of their numbers, to have that room expanded. And for various reasons, and probably budgetary reasons, it never got traction. And then there was some conversation during a couple of years ago, several years ago actually, when governing board members were asking the clubs what could they contribute. Can you help us financially? And they basically couldn't get any traction going otherwise, so they felt obligated to come up with, hey, okay, if it's going to cost us $50,000 to get some more space, and it's probably going to cost more than that for Carl and whatnot, the actual cost of the building is not going to be $50,000, it's more than that, but we can help contribute $50,000 to it. And that was kind of debated and talked about, and an agreement was signed, and they basically pledged that. But their revenue numbers for membership dues aren't big, and nor are their sales at the Village Store, what was once, and that kind of thing. I'm regarding Stained Glass at this point. And so they had concocted a way in which to generate money to pay back that $50,000. And since signing that agreement, they've paid back $20,000, and I believe they're $10,000 ahead of a 10-year schedule to pay the association back their pledge of $50,000. And that was selling raffles. And so they were doing kind of everything you really don't want the club to do in the world of the IRS under 501c7 and social clubs, generating a lot of outside money. And so that was their funding agent. When I was asking them, well, how are you paying this back? It's really wasn't from craft sales and membership dues. It's ultimately they were selling raffles and offering up, and this was going on year round. So I didn't really see that was fair. It's problematic when it comes to compliance and that type of thing. So, the issue came up, can we forgive that? And so we researched that, and I think Cliff will talk about a little more detail as far as that goes. When it comes to pickleball, as we were trying to assemble what Carl presented earlier today, as far as a budgetary, pickleball feels that they need to expand. They need another 18 courts, according to the pickleball folks. And they were willing to come forward and pledge, right, another $990,000 this year to be paid back over 10, 15 years for basically taking what exists now at Palm Ridge, flipping it upside down, flopping it over in the parking lot, and now you have an additional 18 courts of pickleball. IRS, timeout, right? I don't think we can do that. I don't think we should be doing that, because how are you paying that back? Hosting tournaments, bringing in a lot of outside money, problematic. And so we basically asked for a little time to kind of figure out what we're doing here in that kind of world. So we basically stopped that program. Tennis was the same thing. Back when pickleball wanted to expand, they were playing inside the tennis center. The new tennis center gets built. A couple of platform courts get built in tennis. They relocate pickleball over to the parking lot. And the tennis folks contributed X amount of money, I think it was 50 grand, to help offset some of the costs there. And what are they doing to pay us back? Their pledge. Well, they signed a naming rights agreement with Mimos, right, for $20-something thousand before my time. But that's something that we're dealing with now, and Mimos is now paying us like $4,000 a year. So we'll collect, based on the length of that contract, we'll collect another $8,000 from that, leaving tennis like a $9,000 balance. But they're selling advertising. They were selling the Mimos naming rights thing, and on the fencing all throughout that tennis center, they were hanging advertising signage in there, using that money to help pay back that scenario. Again, problematic in the world of social clubs and outside revenue. So we're basically saying, these courts were built. They were built by membership dues and membership money, kind of water under the bridge in my eyes, but in a fairness scenario and trying to get everybody back on the track, the relief on these owed pledges, I am willing and trying to convince others to kind of let's go that route and let's forgive this to get back in compliance. And Cliff, if you want to talk about club tax liabilities and the compliance with the IRS and what we've all uncovered during this process, the microphone is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Cliff Swan, Accounting Manager. Basically, when we brought this up last time, there was a question as to whether the clubs would have tax liability if we forgave these pledges. And we did some research on that. We enlisted CLA, also Hazelwood, and a gentleman by the name of John Noblesdorf, and basically concluded after, kind of roundtable in that, and you were part of that discussion as well. The enforceability came up. That was a major indicator of whether this would be taxable for the clubs. In terms of CLA, their determination was that there was no UBI. It wasn't considered an unrelated business income. So again, no tax liability for IRS or Arizona. So that's basically the determination that our consultants gave us. And of course, we encourage clubs, and they really should consult their own tax and CPA, but we feel that we vetted this pretty well and that there would be no tax liability. As far as the association, when we decide to do it, we would write it off to bad debt, and that's how we would handle it operationally on the books. Any questions?
We brought this to you today only because we're doing an update from the presentation that we had on either the last meeting or the meeting before, but just wanted to share with you all what we took to the governing board last week, the workshop. Bill, did you have something else you wanted?
I just wanted to add onto that. With the cancellation of the previous BNF meeting, we kind of fell out of sequence per se. Normally I would love to have come here first, then gone to the workshop with recommendation, and then off to the governing board. But with the cancellation of that meeting, kind of goofed things up. So we did, for time constraints and whatnot, we did go to workshop first, now back here, and then kind of moving forward.
But like I said, this is informational only. It doesn't require action on our committee. But Anita, you had a question?
I just have one quick question. In regards to the signed agreements, what is the verbiage on it? Does it say loan or pledge? Because it's form over substance is what the IRS and the state of Arizona will look at.
Yeah, well, it doesn't, I don't think it says either. One of them is a letter of understanding.
Okay, has the attorneys looked at that language to verify? And have you gotten an opinion letter from the attorney that is our get out of jail free card if we do get
Yes.
addressed by the IRS in the state of Arizona?
Yes, we have an opinion from CLA on the enforceability and also their take on whether it would be considered UBI or not.
Any other committee questions? Richard?
I do have,
Oh,
oh, I'm sorry, go ahead, I didn't.
we have
Okay.
two Richards.
The distinction between a loan and a pledge. Okay, if I make a pledge to PBS, I'm saying I'm gonna send you $100 a week, but I can't do it for financial reasons. If I go into a banker and say, I wanna take out a $10,000 loan, and I pledge that I'm going to pay you back. I mean, what I'm looking at is also future.
Yeah. Well, good luck getting that loan from from the bank by
But, I
saying
mean,
you
we
pledge
lent
to pay
them
it
the
back.
money. And I think in certain circumstances, I think they do have the money to repay us. So why are we suddenly saying, hey, we're just going to forgive this, because it sounds to me like we're just trying to complete some housekeeping?
A couple of things. First of all, we never loaned money to them. We did a project for them, but there was never a transfer of funds from us to that club.
Okay.
So there was never any fund. The other thing is, with the changes that we have made in the RRPs, these clubs no longer have the ability to raise these funds, and if they did, it would be outside of the 15% they can take in that's unrelated, that's not from members.
Okay, so for clarification, pickleball wants $900,000 to do an expansion. Where does that money come from?
That's off the table.
That's off the table.
That's
completely.
totally off the table.
That would go through the normal budgeting process.
But there
Through
would not
capital
be
projects.
any agreement from the club. They did come to us last year in the spring when a lot of these things were happening, and it was withdrawn.
A real example of that, Richard, would be maybe related to softball club. They independently worked with us and went out and got bids and quotes for the replacement of the artificial turf on the infield. And they have been paying us back with the sale of outfield advertising signs. Okay, that has all been put to bed, right? So the revenue, the cost of that field has been paid off. But the revenue that they're generating from the sales of those outfield fences is problematic in the world of the IRS. So we told them to please stop. They like the looks of that, so they think they want to continue selling advertising signage. And that's ultimately going to be a governing board decision. However, the contracts now that they're generating by going out and chasing down money is being directed 100% back to the association. So we're signing those agreements for a year. If they're longer than a year, it's going to the governing board. But we're trying to put an end line on this until we figure out what's what. So now the revenue that's being generated annually on the sales of the advertising on the outfield fence goes to the association. And then in 6 or 8 years, when the club itself decides that it's time to have that infield replaced with additional artificial turf, it's the responsibility of the association via Pete and our team when it comes to the reserve study to, meeting's over, to fund that based on getting our budgets approved. You know, coming down the road, I think we talked a little bit about water. You know, there could be a day and a time where that entire field is synthetic. You know, if we can't stop throwing potable water on that outfield, you know, something down the road may change. But as we sit right now, those responsibilities belong to the association. We don't really need, and we don't want to force our owner members to go out running around, force them to fundraise. We want you to enjoy your time here and recreate, and enhancing these facilities. That's our job.
That answers my question. Just one other follow-up question. How much money are we asking to write off?
With tennis, I believe it's in the $9,000 range, like $991.88, if you want an exact number. That's what my brain's telling me. And then pickleball, none. They do have a $70,000 balance, which is being paid over time with the naming rights from Sand Chevrolet and Liberty Buick. So that revenue is continuing to come to us now as opposed to the club.
Okay.
And then I think there's a $30,000 balance, excuse me, with Stained Glass. They had a $50,000 letter of understanding. They've paid back 20. But again, kind of the rules changed in their world, how they were going about paying us back. And so that's the larger of the outstandings. Now, we still have agreements with other clubs that do not fall in 501c7. They're 501c3s. There's about a $500,000 commitment from the Auto Restoration Club. And I think that's about the only one. Oh, Rotary, but that's not an association club. There's a nonprofit club, be it the Rotary Club, that owes us about $20,000 from the installation of the meditation garden out at Beardsley Park. That's being paid back with the sale of memorial bricks. And we have the Friends of the Library with not a pledge, but they have a $1.2 million balance that is dedicated to the improvements at our library, that they control those funds thereof. And I think that's about it.
Gary.
So Bill, if 3 months from now, a 501c7 club A, comes to you and makes a suggestion on expanding their facility and offers to pay 50% of it, pick a number, 25,000 of 50, what's the response?
I think based on getting some policy changes, which we recently have tabled, I think the governing board would welcome that, depending on how they're raising their money and making sure via, their accountants, they're all independent clubs doing their own thing. But if they're doing everything in compliance with the IRS and they do have some funding that they would like to contribute, again, I think the governing board would like to see that in escrow or at least cash up front, so we're not chasing you down 5 years from now, to help contribute to that cause. And then we would be bringing those projects forward to you and other committees and the governing board for ultimately budget approval.
But they'll all requests would go through the normal capital process, regardless of whether there's an implied or a specific contribution offered.
Sir, yes, sir.
Yes.
And the decision would be made based on merit and need as opposed to want.
Correct. Correct.
Good.
And then just with a recent improvement that we made over at Kuntz, the pickleball folks are in need of additional courts, but for a very nominal fee, we threw about $3,000 worth of paint down on some recently enhanced tennis courts, giving the pickleball folks 6 additional courts. As we move forward, if we do that with the other 3 courts, depending on what transpires with our master plan study, but a very effective way to provide additional recreational outlet for folks in need without having to drop hundreds of thousands of dollars, I think is really coming forward. So that was a good move.
Dick, you had a question.
Yeah, I do. This is, I heard in the presentation, it's something that threw up a red flag for me, was that it sounds as though we're comfortable with the position that we're in, the advice that we've gotten on how we're going to handle the pledges that were outstanding, because we have obtained what we consider sufficient legal advice, and we have the letter of confirmation and all. But the comment was made, but we have told the clubs that they need to seek their own tax advice.
Yes.
To me, as a kind of a layperson, that would be a red flag. I mean, what are we really telling them? Because we've explained, these are the circumstances and these are the conditions that you're okay with. Are we telling them that if you decide to go beyond that, you better beware?
A little bit of that, just some education.
Yeah.
Because, we have 100 clubs doing 100 different things. And, casting the big blanket over all of them is a little difficult task. I think Donna can attest to that as we're trying to write our RMPs that capture all, right? So it's a little tough. But I think the message that we're trying to deliver is simply the fact that these clubs are all independents. And that, as an independent, it would be a wise move, I think, to consult with a CPA. I don't think it's going to be that expensive to do. A lot of these clubs don't generate enough money to even worry about, right? And they're all, 90% of them are doing exactly what they're supposed to be doing. But there are some that do not, and it was just simply to consult with a CPA to make sure that they're clean. Because we don't want to shut the metal shop down. We love the metal shop, but they do have they sell mailboxes, right? They sell them to people that live here, and they sell them to people that live in Sun City. So they just have to understand the 3515 rule, and if they have any questions, please consult their individual, and they do their independent filings. That's not on us. Thank you.
I have one question for Pete. Pete, for the revenue that's coming in, what line item does that get reported as? Ancillary?
No, specific to these transactions,
To the revenue stream that the rec center is now getting.
Well, there
and
is
where's
no
it hitting
kidding.
on the financial package?
So these occurred. I believe it was 2019 when, the late part of 2019, when the stained glass had completed their project over Palm Ridge. That letter of understanding that described a 10-year pledge. They were given till 2029 to do that, and that document was recorded as club funded, and a receivable was established. So the entire $50,000 was posted to that club funded that was brought up earlier in the policy. And
Yeah.
then they made the $20,000 payment against that. That's what we want to relieve.
Yeah, I probably wasn't clear enough. I'm thinking of the Liberty Auto. The funds that are coming in now that we've made the changes.
Well,
on
yes, those come directly to us, and actually, Cliff and I were chatting about that. Historically, they've been just going against, well, it's a little bit hard to explain. I may need to have you do a separate meeting, or I can bring it forward next month. The three that do the advertising agreements all have a little bit different. Tennis had it go to a liability. Softball would come to us, and then we'd spend, then we'd give them 50%. All the monies now come to us, but they've been going, for softball in particular, goes to this liability account. Now we need to change it to reflect going to an advertising, which historically we haven't ever had that revenue stream, but that's a simple adding it to the general ledger.
And it will go to ancillary, to answer your question.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Other questions? Okay, let's move on to committee comments. I'll just go around the room. Anita, I'll start with you. Any comments?
This was a really good meeting, Ann.
Thank you.
It really is very informative. I appreciate the staff's comments and interactions, and thank you.
Well, I have to say, this is a fabulous committee to work with. All of you put a lot of time and effort and thought into preparation and then interacting in the meeting. So it takes all of us. Gary?
I don't think any of you want to know what Trevor Men's Club decided this morning.
2 beers or 1?
Richard? It's what we should do. Kathy?
Yes, I want to try to bring forward here over the next couple meetings a thought I've had on capital projects reports, maybe on an annual basis. Again, for transparency, what the project cost, what the balance was, et cetera, like that. And I'd like to try to write up something and have a discussion on it and see if there's any consensus or interest in that.
Are you talking about a policy or just how we obtain information? What are your thoughts there?
It could be either, actually. It could become a policy, or it could be just become a practice, you know.
Well, let's start with just
kind of write up
just
what my thoughts were, what the intent is, what the purpose is, and have a discussion.
And see how the committee might want to go with it.
Sure.
Okay, thank you. John?
No comment.
Dick?
Other than I want to thank everyone. I appreciate the opportunity to sit on the committee. I find it very professional. I find it very interesting, and I will pledge to do my best. Thank you.
That's all we want. Thank you. George?
Thank you, Madam Treasurer. I just want to put out a huge thank you to the staff for all the presentations and the information that's available to us that of years gone by have not been there. They do an awesome job, and we should just be really thankful we have a great staff around us.
We do have an excellent staff, and I thank all of you for hanging in with us. As you know, we did not have our meeting 2 weeks ago. I guess I made up for it with this meeting, but I've pledged all of you we're not going to have a meeting unless we've got things that we need to discuss. So December. I don't want to give them false hope at this point in time. Pete, our next meeting is scheduled for December 7th. Although Anita has already informed me she will be, relaxing in Hawaii, although she may have to get up at the crack of dawn to join us. But Pete and I have discussed that maybe we'll only need one meeting, if that. Is that correct, Pete?
Yeah, a 5-second version is, first of all, I think we were in agreement, and it certainly doesn't preclude this to being accurate to your own situation, but December 21st is right during holiday week. I know a lot of our staff tend to take that time off. Just the thought that I brought to Ann was, with you guys' blessing, we move it up and, keep to the one week. We threw around maybe a December 14th if we were going to sustain having the meeting at all, or stay with what you've got. I, don't preclude that has to be the case.
I guess I would ask then, everyone, if we were to go to one meeting in December, would the 14th be agreeable? Just tell Trail Ridge that no. The answer's no. Okay. Everyone else would be okay. Okay, Pete and I will talk after Thanksgiving and start taking a look, see if the financials will even be available by then, and what other business we might have. But tentatively, let's plan for just one meeting, and that will be on the 14th if we have that. Is that okay? Okay, thank you all very much. I appreciate you hanging in until afternoon, but it's been a good meeting, and I appreciate all of you. Thank you so much. And the meeting is adjourned at 12:04.